Right, I think we will make a start, and hopefully things will be working again online. Any other any other questions, David?
Chair, yeah, thank you. I'm just interested on the benchmarking, which is 3.8. Is it correct that the Norfolk County, is that an in-house way they're doing it, or are they also, is that like a separate business that they're contracting to?
The contract in Norfolk is operated by West Norfolk Care and Repair, which sits in one of their district councils.
But your question was whether it's run in-house, which is if effectively it's being run in-house within West Norfolk, is that right? So the staff are employed by West Norfolk.
The staff are employed by West Norfolk, but the service operates across the whole of Norfolk.
Lewis.
Yes, thank you. I see that the new contract will also be monitored against some key performance indicators. That's a new feature, but also I would like to ask what changes are proposed in the new contract compared to the current one?
Thank you. I'll start with some of the differences in monitoring information and pass over to Diana with some of the additional additions to the service delivery of the contract. So as I mentioned, we are putting in some more stringent KPIs around productivity and delivery to ensure that we can allow the maximum number of people to access this service and ensure that it grows with the demand that we're expecting to grow over the next few years. The other quite exciting part of this is we're using a cost benefit analysis model that was trialed and rolled out in Manchester and has been held up as really good practice for looking at how our interventions impact on people at an individual level, but then scaling that up so we can understand over the entirety of that service what the impact is for adult social care and other agencies potentially, and it will give us a good indicative number that we can start to attach to some of these services, and we will be trialing that as part of the existing contract so we can roll it out from day one of the new contract, having taken the learning from that trial. And then I'll pass over to Diana on some of the additions to service delivery.
Thanks, Shauna. One of the other differences or changes, developments that we've included in the new contract is to try and get the provider to support people with more low-level assistive technology or technology-enabled care. So working very closely with our technology-enabled care teams, but there are some really low-level bits of technology that perhaps people sometimes struggle to install themselves. So we would like the service to support people with that. Things like Ring doorbells, making sure they know how to use their Lifeline, and various other sort of low-level bits of assistive technology.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. So I note that the new contract will be monitored against certain KPIs, and that the anticipated benefit here is that that should drive the marketing agenda or the provider's marketing agenda. Does the contract value provide the room for growth that would be necessary given the anticipated increase in demand that you'd get as a result of that marketing drive?
Yeah, do you want to do that?
So it will allow us to have a really evidence-based approach to test that and to test how far we can stretch that service. And then it gives us a good evidence base to assess the impact of that intervention, but also the capacity of that service. And then we can take a view as commissioners as to whether we need more, whether we need something slightly different, or and whether investment stacks up in that area and has a big enough impact to enable us to continue it. So what it will do, I can't answer the question definitively, will it meet all demand coming through, but it will give us a good evidence base from which to take proactive action to ensure we meet the demand in the best possible way and achieve value for money at the same time.
Thank you. Any other questions, David?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a really great initiative to have the implications of doing this for other agencies and the costs that they're going to save down the line. Is it possible to see the Manchester report or information? Could that be shared with us just to get an kind of greater idea?
Yeah, we can take an action to share the model outside of this. Yeah.
Yeah, go on.
And obviously, if we spend, for example, £10 and the NHS are saving 100,000 because someone's not having major surgery or from a fall, etc., is it possible that we could then go to those agencies and ask them to contribute into this process? Because obviously it's all district council, county council are investing and we're saving loads of money for other people. Is there a way that we could get some of that investment back?
I think we could use it to open the discussion, but the discussion's far broader than just the handy person service. I think there's probably a wider system-based discussion around how we manage prevention in its entirety, and this forms one service within that. So that information can feed into that overarching approach. And a lot of those discussions are happening in North Place and South Place with our partners and district councils and city councils in the same room. And so it will be really useful to inform that discussion, but it won't be based solely on this service, if that makes sense.
Thank you. All right. Any other comments? I've got a couple, if I may. In a subsequent paper, it talks about Match My Project as a contribution that the provider has to provide. Does that apply to this project, or is this too small? And the second is it appropriate for us to see the split between cost, quality, social value, or whatever other criteria you use? Or does that go to a different committee, or is that none of our business?
No, we can share that as an action. We can share the evaluation criteria and the split in terms of weighting, Chair. And in terms of Match My Project, it's a new approach that our corporate procurement team are taking at the moment, and they're rolling it out. So it may be that this one hasn't quite hit the timescales, but we'll take an action to confirm that outside of the committee.
Okay, Gurdif is nodding enthusiastically, so I'm assuming that it doesn't quite hit the timescale, but it would be good if we could do it for this one if there is still opportunity to do it.
I'll ask the question, and yeah, we'll.
Okay, all right. Any other comments, questions? No, but otherwise I think we're very supportive of everything you're doing here. If we move to the report recommendations, the committee is being asked to approve the retender of the handy person service at a value of 169,339 per annum, inclusive of £81,265 of district council contributions, which account for 48% of the annual cost. This represents £846,695 for the total contract period of 2 + 2 + 1 years. Extensions are at Cambridgeshire County Council's discretion, with the ability to vary and give notice throughout the lifetime of the contract, and will be adjusted for future inflationary uplifts. And B, delegate responsibility for awarding and executing a new handy person contract starting 1st of April 2026, including subsequent extension periods, to the Executive Director for Adults, Health and Commissioning, in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of Adults and Health Committee. Are we unanimous on that? I think we are. So I think we accept all that as approved. Thank you very much. Thank you. So item 6 is a report on securing compliance. There are two issues: the adult social care fleet procurement and housing relating supported housing procurement. And Shauna stays with us to introduce this report and is joined by Gurdif Singh, the Head of Service for Commissioning, Contracts and Brokerage. So who would like to start? Gurdif.
If I may, Chair, thank you. Good morning, everybody. So the report seeks approval to tender and contract 2 different services. Both services would be to deliver a refreshed set of contracts and also address a procurement process breach. They relate to both the Russell Street service and also the adult social care passenger transport services. I'd like to draw your attention to section 2.2 and 2.3, where we acknowledge the breach and confirm that it's been reported into the Assets and Procurement Committee, where it was discussed earlier this month on the 10th of June. In 3.1, we describe the procurement process that we wish to undertake, where we've gone about looking at what opportunities there are and the approach we might take to reprocure the transport activities. And the proposed recommendation is using a recognized framework, which is detailed in paragraph 313. In addition to that, as the Chair has already mentioned, in paragraph 316, we are asking the provider, the successful provider, to use Match My Project to contribute to community activities as part of their ongoing activity across the life of the contract. The life of the contract here being the initial 4-year period plus 2 12-month extension options should we take that up. And 3.18, I draw your attention to engagement that's taken place with people that would use the transport service, primarily those that would require support to and from day services, but there are other aspects as well. Further to that, in 3.2, I just want to remind the committee that the Russell Street service is about a retendering of care and support, and in 3.22, we confirm that property related, i.e. housing related, is carried out and both delivered by the landlord, and the individual would pay for that through housing benefits. So it's not connected to this retender. And further in 3.3 as a section, just coming back to the original breach point. So this is a response to weaker contract management in the past, which we've now addressed to improve in 3 ways. One is that we do now operate more robustly through contract management. But in 3.3, we also refer to a change of our governance process to have greater and stronger oversight through our adult leadership team. And thirdly, the additional processes in the past months, probably a year or so, where we have greater financial scrutiny to look for and identify earlier on any potential contracts that might fall a similar way in terms of breach. So the likelihood of a occurrence of such breach are much reduced. And finally, in section 4, the timetables for both those reprocurement, with view to subject to committee's approval, allow us to award contracts sometime in November 2025. So I commend the paper for committee's approval.
Thank you, Gerd. Any comments, questions? Lucy?
Thank you very much. I'm not going to suggest that we don't renew this contract or that we don't go down this procurement process. I think it's very important that we do that to remedy the breach and to make sure that we've got the right processes in place and the right transport in place for the council and for the people who need it. But I do have a plea to make when you're putting those contracts in place, to try and make sure that they have some flexibility in them so that this contract could in the future work with other contracts that the council has across children's transport and the work that the combined authority is also doing on transport, because I think there's an absolute need in our area and in lots of other areas actually to make sure that we are joining up our transport systems more effectively than has been done in the past. I think it's important to get on with this particular procurement process so that we're not in breach and so that we have the transport available. But if it's possible to write when you're designing that contract and looking at the procurement process, to make sure that there are ways that if in the future we can join this up with other contracts and use our contracts more effectively, that would be really helpful. So if you can reassure me on that, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
So thank you for the question. So the answer is in 2 parts. So the project is supported by children's transport in the first instance. There is a degree of flexibility already built in. So our initial requirement is is 19 vehicles plus 3, but there's a further 7 built in as flexibility. But I will take away the question around the combined authority and widening the contract so it's even more flexible.
Thank you. I've got Anna and then Steve.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. I just wanted to understand under the commission. So firstly, I'm really pleased to see the reports from the Bedfordshire group about the transport that they found, the comments were broadly positive and encouraging and wanted it to continue. And also very positive comments about the accommodation at Russell Street and the support that the residents had found there, which I'm very pleased to hear about. But I just wanted to come onto the commissioning process, and at 3.3, it says that the contracts which were non-compliant were long-standing contracts with little in common other than neither contract benefited from strong contract management, which is a good admission to make. But then you've moved on to say, or the report moves on to say, officers are now working to a stronger governance structure, which is set up to allow management by exception. And I wondered if you could explain to us what that means, please.
So the approach we take is that that officers will maintain contracts through contract management, through engagement with providers on an ongoing basis, and that we'll use our business intelligence information, so the expenditure that we have on contracts on a continuous basis. And as we see items getting close to a risk, then we'll escalate to the adult leadership team to look for support and direction before we take any further action. So we do that by, the assumption is we are working appropriately with the management information we have, and then we'll draw out these exceptions and then escalate to the governance through the governance process.
Are you happy with that, Anna?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, Chair.
Steve and then Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Just thinking about local government reform that's kind of zooming towards us, and these multi-year contracts that we're signing, which obviously have to be signed. Now, I understand that if local government reform happens, whatever the new authority is will take on all the responsibilities of the old ones. But I just wonder if you could tell us if you've got any concerns or worries in regards to these contracts going on to a new council, and whether they can all be met, whether there's any danger, because obviously there are some vulnerable people involved in some of this. Thank you.
So local government reforms and our contracting and procurement arrangements are being discussed with the head of procurement. We have put in place adequate contract clauses in the terms and conditions to allow for us to move across in due course, whatever the direction of travel is. The general aim is we don't have all our contracts ending at the same time, because that's probably even worst case scenario for whatever any future arrangements might look like. So it's close cooperation with our central procurement team to make sure we've got that flexibility built into the terms and conditions.
Just before we move on to Richard, can I just clarify something which, based on what Steve said, on page 52 of the public pack in 4.2.1, it talks about the framework terms and conditions allow for vehicles to be returned to the supplier without penalty and at a short notice in relation to local government reorganisation. My concern is that suppliers inevitably are going to start increasing the cost if they know that they could get all these vehicles back fairly quickly. Is that what is intended, what is meant, or could you clarify that?
Certainly. So the intention is that we've only got the 3 out of the 22 vehicles on very short-term lease. That's the flexibility we're referring to in returning back. So the core, the 19, gives stability to the providers, and they know this at the outset, so they'll price that into their responses.
Okay, thank you. I misread that. Richard, thank you.
Thank you. My first intervention, so I do congratulate you, Councillor Wilson and Councillor Navarro, for your appointments and wish you well. On this issue, 82 Russell Street is in my own division in Cambridge, and I very much welcome the extension here, and I particularly welcome the consultation exercise with Voiceability that took place by our commissioners. And it was really interesting to see the results in the report. And so I really want to place on record my appreciation for that. And I hope that we'll see similar exercises being reported to committee in the future, because it really allows us to hear what our service users are saying. I hope that officers have the courage to put in the bad things that are said as well as the good things, because, you know, we're all grown up and mature in this committee, I hope. And we need to be able to see where the shortfalls are as well as the strengths. But I thought that was an excellent exercise. On the transport, I'm really grateful and support what Councillor Nessinger said. You know, with the greatest respect, the past administration said to officers over and over again, don't come forward with transport proposals without seeing how they can be integrated with the council's transport service and where there are synergies. And so I don't really think there's an excuse to say that that hasn't happened on this before, and we'll take it away and look at it now. I don't mean any disrespect, but, you know, there's a clear will for that. It seems that there's a clear will from the new administration, and it's a way of saving money and expanding transport. And it's not, I don't think it's good enough to just nod this through without having considered that myself. And then non-compliant. You know, nobody watching this on the YouTube channel or the website for the recording will understand what went wrong and why, and whether the lessons were learned. And we as councillors, I appreciate there was a discussion at Assets and Procurement Committee, but forgive me if I didn't watch the video of that for 3 or 4 hours. I think we in this committee need to know when mistakes are made, and we need to know what they are. And we need to back our officers if genuine human error has been made, and not falsely criticise genuine errors, but to make sure we understand why something went wrong, and to ensure that systems are being put in place to ensure it happens again. And it's disappointing not to see that in the report. I think for the members of the public, they don't want this teased out by councillors asking questions. It should have been there in the first place. And I hope officers will again be careful in the future to not try and cover over the cracks, and to be honest and open and transparent when they do so. So let's hear now what went wrong, why that went wrong, and how it can be ensured it won't happen again in the future. And finally, they say in the report that increasing it from 24 vehicles to 29 vehicles is flexible for local government reform. I'm worried. I don't want to see report after report coming to the council that says this is for local government reform, which isn't genuinely thought through and justified. And I'm worried that those points have just been added in. You know, in what way does the possibility of 5 extra vehicles prepare for local government reform? And is there anything else the officers are saying that prepares for that? Is the contract being written in a different way because of local government reform? You know, I think we deserve, again, more serious answers than that, and it should have been in the report, I think. And if, as was the case under the former council, they weren't ready and they're going through that, that's a fine answer from my point of view. But what I don't want to start saying is it's all right for local government reform when it really isn't. And I'm suspicious in this case that it may not be. Thank you.
Okay. Gerda, when you discuss the impacts of the non-compliance, could you just briefly explain as well what the impact was, as well as the why it might have happened? And the bit about increasing the number of vehicles from 24 to 29, I thought wasn't down to local government reorganisation. I thought it was due to the potential for increased business demand, but again, you can perhaps clarify that. Thank you.
With the non-compliance, given that both these contracts have been in place for multiple years, they've changed hands over time from officer to officer. And as we've continued to spend on them and the services performed, we've lost oversight on the cumulative value of those contracts over time. Our processes going back a few years didn't really allow us to see that and therefore trigger the breach early or prevent the breach from happening. So what's happened in the past year or two has been processes to mitigate those particular circumstances. That's the essence of it. The additional capacity isn't specifically for LGR. This allows us to improve transport more widely and allows us to use additional vehicles on a business case by business case basis as the primary reason for the additional vehicles being built into the contract. However, we do also recognize in the event of LGR and any changes, there may be a need to adjust routes. And if we adjust routes, we might need then some additional vehicles. It's our first judgment of what we think we need. But in the event we do need more, as we've said here, for those additional vehicles, it'll be on a business case by business case basis.
Richard, and then Patrick, I think, is going to come in.
So is the contract being different in any way at all because of local government reform, or is that just been put in this report that is meaningless?
So we do need to put in clauses into the contracts to allow any different commissioning entity to be able to then take on the contracts. That's the reason for we're putting in words and clauses for LGR.
Okay, I am satisfied by that. I don't want to seem to be overcritical. I am satisfied by that answer. But again, I think it would be good if that could have been presented. And if you bring forward further commissioning proposals, I ask you to lay out those sorts of arguments in the report, not just in answer to question committee.
Patrick.
Yeah, thank you. And just to respond to Councillor Howitt's point, I think we will take on board those comments and make sure that future decisions reflect that. As a council, we are looking at, even though it's still uncertainty around the form that LGR will develop, we understand about the implications of contracts. Now, some contracts already have them built in around novation to other entities, and that allows that. But what we're also trying to do is understand whether or not either the legislation around LGR or the Procurement Act that we're now working to gives us that freedom and flexibility, and how do we then reflect that, both in terms of the tender process, being mindful of Councillor Wilson's point about the possible increased costs that providers will levy as a result of potentially having to innovate 2 organisations or 3 organisations, or the numbers that comes out at the end, but also around the way that we would have to safeguard those contracts to make sure that they continue to deliver, continue to perform during a period of change, which may be innovation to other entities depending upon the outcome of LGR. But we will make sure that we reflect that, and we're having the conversations, as Gerd have said, with the head of procurement and with Michael Hudson and Stephen as the Chief Exec and 151 officer, to make sure that as a council we've got a standard approach for all committees, so we're all signed, because there are a number of contracts that are either due to be renewed that will run over into that beyond the 2028 period, or some that actually fall due for retendering during that period. So it's about how do we make sure that the council is safeguarding its financial responsibility as much as its stewardship of the safeguarding the services we provide for people of Cambridgeshire.
Okay, last point, Anna, then we must move on.
Yep, absolutely, Chair. Thank you. I sympathise and agree with Councillor Howitt. I think it would have been, we don't need to go into it in laborious detail, but I'm a substitute on this committee, so I'm unfamiliar with any previous discussion of this, but I do agree that some brief description of what happened should have been in the paper, because I sat there reading it thinking, well, I wonder what the breach was. And Gurdev Singh has kindly said to us, contracts changed hands over time from officer to officer and lost track of the cumulative value of contracts over time. Now, I don't know actually whether that means the cost. Was it that the costs went up over time, or was it that the value of it went down? The value to the users went down. I'm not going to ask for an answer to that now, but I do think a brief description of what actually happened would have been helpful in this paper, so we understood what was going on. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think we note that rather than expect a response. No other questions. We can move to the report recommendations. The committee is being asked to retender the support service at 82 Russell Street in Cambridge City for people with autism and learning disabilities. The cost of the recommissioning for a 5-year period, which is 2 + 3 years, will be £1,304,435, exempt of VAT at 2025-26 contract rates. B, re-tender the hire of the adult social care passenger transport fleet, and there's lots of details about that. C, delegate authority to award and execute the provision of the adult social care passenger transport fleet and extension periods to the executive director in consultation with chair and vice chair. And D, delegate authority to award and execute the provision of support services at 82 Russell Street and extension periods to the executive director in conjunction with the chair and vice chair. Are we all in favour of that, supporting of that? Yes. I thought you were going to ask a question, Steve, but okay, thank you very much. So we'll move on to item 7. Thank you, Gerda and Shauna. Val, is the recommissioning drug and alcohol services is item 7, and the report will be introduced by Val Thomas, the Deputy Director of Public Health. And I don't know, I'm afraid, your colleague's name, Val.
I'll just ask her to introduce herself.
I'm Susie Tolbert. I'm the Lead Commissioner for Drugs and Alcohol. Susie Tolbert, Lead Commissioner for Drugs and Alcohol in the Public Health team.
Thanks, Susie. Val, are you going to start?
Yes, I am. Yes, I'll start and I'll run through the main points of the paper. Then Susie's going to talk a little bit about the service, how it's changed and the outcome and its outcomes. Drug and alcohol services. This paper is about adult drug and alcohol treatment services. And these are not a mandated services, but I think the legislation says that local authorities are expected to provide this service for residents. It's primarily funded by the public health grant, but as you know, the paper does make that quite a complex funding landscape. The services are very well evidenced, and there's a good cost effectiveness evidence for them. And in terms of how we benchmark, page 83, 317 is an example of that, a comparison between regional and the English average cost. But Susie will pick up on some more of these aspects. The other point is that users of this service usually have complex issues. Their treatment takes many years in most cases. I think the average is about 6 years. So outcomes tend to be quite complex. And again, we'll pick up on that later on. The paper essentially has 2 parts. Initially, this paper, a paper went to Adults and Health Committee in January. And that was, the recommendation there was, as the contract was ending in March, the current contract was ending in March 26, it was to ask for approval to take the paper out to tender. The other aspect of that was that we still had some more work to do on the needs assessment and to do market testing, which would inform our approach to procurement. But probably the most complicated factor of it is the funding. And that has affected the funding for this year's service, the last year of the current contract, and also the reprocurement, which is just about to start. So the first recommendation in the paper refers to this year, and it's in the context of the National Drug Strategy from Harm to Hope, which was released in 21. And following on that, we have received annual increases in funding. The complication is that we only get confirmation of that funding on the March before the new year's about to start. And for this year, 25-26, we could not initially say, yes, we'd like to add it into the contract because it needed to come here for approval because of its value and to be compliant with contract regulations. However, we did get confirmation of that funding in April. So it's coming here now to ask the committee to support the recommendation that the additional funding for this year, which is approximately 1.5 million, is again varied into the current contract that we've had with Change Go and Live, our provider at the moment. The rationale for that is that we're in the last year of the service. Introducing a new provider at this stage could be quite disruptive in terms of continuity of care for service users, with the potential of another one the following year as we reprocure. CGL, our provider, has been incredibly collaborative in working through the cost pressures, the inflationary cost pressures, and responded very well in terms of this additional funding and meeting the terms of the grant. And as I said, Susie will talk more about the service and the improvements that have been made and the improved outcomes. So that is our first recommendation, that the additional funding for this year, 25-26, that is coming from the centre of approximately 1.5 million is buried into the current contract with CGL. The second part of the paper builds on the paper that went in January to this committee, where the approval to go out to tender was secured. We are now at the point where we've done the needs assessment, we've done the market testing, and the paper is now presents the value of the new contract, but also with a caveat because of the unknown quantities of the additional funding from the centre, but also from a small local funding grants that we get from the Probation Service and OPCC, to build a flexibility into the contract. And this is, we've obviously worked through with our legal and procurement teams to add the potential of adding 1.7 million each year to the contract if we get these grants coming through. Otherwise, we'd be coming back every year to ask for approval. So that is the first aspect of the new contract, the complexity of the funding arrangement. The second aspect of the contract is the procurement. In public health, we are subject to PSR, which is, I don't know why my mind has gone a blank, because I use this provider selection regime regulations, which we are subject to along with the NHS. And the difference with PSR is that it allows for direct award as well as a competitive procurement. And we did the market testing as part of the analysis of what would be the best route to procure. The outcome of that and lots of discussions with legal and procurement was that all of the direct awards, even in the context of having a provider that is performing very well, would run the risk of a challenge. So the recommended approach is a competitive procurement. So those are the two recommendations relating to this part of the paper. The value of the contract has a built-in caveat that will allow for these increases, which are anticipated, but it's not definite. And secondly, the value could vary as well. And third, and then the second point in relation to the new contract is that the procurement approach should be a competitive tender. Susie is going to talk just a little bit about the service, the improvements that have been made through the additional funding, and the impact that has had on our outcomes.
Hello, hello everyone. Sorry, I'm just getting over a cold, so hopefully you can hear me okay. Okay, just a bit of a quick overview in terms of what the service currently does. There is some information in the paper, but it's an open access service across Cambridgeshire. That means anybody with any drug and alcohol issues, there's no thresholds for care. Anyone can walk in the service and receive support. The service runs 3 main sites across the county and additional satellite clinics in the smaller towns. It ranges all the way through from advice and information to specialist care. So we do pharmacological prescribing for people that are particularly opioid dependent, through to community alcohol detox, and then all the way through to residential care. So that includes rehab and inpatient detox. So it's literally the whole broad spectrum. There's the specialist treatment service, and then we've got an independent, innovative recovery service, which we put into the last contract, which has been received incredibly well by our service user group. And this extends recovery into the community in a long term. So once people leave specialist treatment, they then move into the recovery side, and there's recovery activities, peer support available across the county of Cambridgeshire. And that is really key to developing recovery assets, recovery communities, and means that there's always somebody that will support you on a day-to-day basis, either within or out of hours. So that's running incredibly well. We are very lucky to have additional funding nationally. This came out of the National Drug Strategy, and there was recognition that up and down the country, drug and alcohol treatment services were really struggling. And the idea of the drug strategy is increase the capacity of services, but also the quality of services. The grant money is ring-fenced. It has to be used for a certain purpose. We have to develop a local plan, and that has to be agreed by national. And so over the last 3 to 4 years with the additional funding, we've invested it in the local workforce in terms of the quality and additional members, which means that the numbers on caseloads can go down so we can see people more frequently. We've invested money into funding transport costs so people can get to appointments. We've had We've developed a relationship with the CAB. We funded 2 workers so we can address benefits and poverty issues and able to reduce people's debts. If people are in a better position in terms of debt-wise, and they can make good steps in terms of their recovery. So we have to recognise that this client group is incredibly complex. They come with physical and co-occurring mental health conditions. So this is about supporting every aspect of the life. It's very rare that somebody walks into the service that has only got a drug and alcohol issue. It comes with all sorts of other issues that the service needs to support with. We've also funded additional placements and also the rollout of long-term buprenorphine treatment, which is new to the sector. So a significant increase in what we're able to provide as a service, and as a result, outcomes have improved. We've seen a 30% increase in new presentations since the baseline in 2022, a 16% increase in those in structured treatment. Our treatment retention and treatment progress levels are either in line or above national average, and we've had a reduction in unmet need rates across the county. We were the first area in the east of England to have a multi-site achieving Hep C microelimination, which we're really proud of.
Thank you, Susie. And just mindful of the discussion in the previous paper about local government reform, we have built in the break, the first contract break. The ask is for approval of a 7-year contract with a break at 2 and 4 years. That was designed around the local government reorganisation. We've discussed it with legal and how that needs to be built into the contract and the service specification as well. And I think we are particularly aware in relation to this contract because they are the service users are very vulnerable. And I think when any contract change, you're going to have a risk around that. So we are very mindful as we go through the process of LGR that to work with our providers very closely, our current and any new providers as contracts novate and so forth, to ensure that this group of people don't fall through the gap.
Excellent, thank you. Well, it all sounds extremely positive. Any comments, questions from anybody? David.
Thank you, Chair. On page 96 in section 3.9, it calls out that Cambridge City, there's a extra coverage for rough sleepers, and it's based on a section 31 grant. What about the other large market towns where we also have rough sleeping? How is that covered?
So the service generally will respond to rough sleepers in terms of across the county, but there is, as part of the grant money, the government specifically gave money to Cambridge City to build a specific personalised service because it was a high area of need. It doesn't mean that across the county we're not meeting that need, but it's got a dedicated team, whereas the rest of the county, we reach out from the hubs to meet need in local areas.
So, okay. Yeah. Any other comments, questions? Anna?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report and thank you for the extensive evidence base that has come with it. And thank you for explaining that extremely complicated financial scheduling that you've had to do. And I just wanted to, say that I totally support this paper because, as you rightly pointed out, these are some of the most vulnerable people, and it would be awful if the service would dropped just at the point when they needed help. So I thoroughly support this, and thank you very much for the very thorough report you've given us. Thank you.
No, I agree. Any other comments? This may not be a question for you, maybe something which we need to consider at spokes or views of Patrick, but it's excellent that you've given us the equality impact assessment. Do we need all the detail, or do we just need to know that you've done it and what the summary of the key findings were? So things like David referred to about rough sleeping would clearly come out. But do we need the details of this? I mean, maybe slightly unfair to ask you, Val, because it appears in some of the other papers as well. And I'm just trying to think for democratic services purposes, whether or not we can reduce the amount of paperwork that we have to look at and they have to produce.
I think we Shenda's, Patrick.
Thank you, Chair. At the moment, the guidance is for all key decisions, the equality impact assessment should be published so that the committee has sight of it.
Sorry, if this is a silly question, but the timing of the government grant and the point at which that arrived was clearly less than ideal. We have over the last 4 years had constant discussions with government about short-term funding and the impact that it has on our ability to plan well and run services well. There are a number of places where, I mean, that it felt as if that had got a slightly better kind of a year ago, and now it's got worse again. And given the change of government, I understand why that might be the case, but I do think that potentially there is a need to repeat all the things that we said 3 years ago about how, how unhelpful it is to have lots of small pots of short-term funding do not allow us to run our services as effectively as we could. I'm hoping that, given that we've just had a 3-year spending review, there will be less of that. But so my question really is, will the short-term nature of that and the fact that we didn't get that money through until April, and now we're having to do a kind of catch-up program, have had a detrimental impact on actual service users, or with the collaboration of the I can't remember the acronym. The provider have meant that actually, although that was tricky for us, there wouldn't have been any evidence of that at the service user end. Do you feel that that's something that we need to remind government about again, or do you have some sense that actually this was a short-term issue that might get better? Sorry, the second one of those is a very political question, and if you don't want to answer it, that's fine.
I think going back to last year when we had the uncertainty, there was a lot, and through our networks as well, the Association of Directors of Public Health, OHID, the officer, and so forth, we work very much with the regional OHID as well and feed it up through them. And we will continue to do that. But the challenge really is to make sure that patients, service users, do not experience a break in their care. And I think we're extremely lucky with our current provider, who really, and I think it says in the paper how responsive they've been. And we put in place contingency plans as well for this year. If we don't get it, can we shape the service, really try to maintain the new elements of the service that have had the most impact? And that has been done with the collaboration of the provider, essentially. And I think it's an ongoing process, and we'll have to do, I can see us doing the same coming this year. I think we just have to be prepared. as we don't know. I don't know, Susie, if you've picked up anything more from the meetings that we've
No, we're waiting to hear in terms of spending review. But like you, we're all calling for longer term funding so we can make some really positive decisions. The funding has meant that it became a bolt-on to the main service, and what we're hoping through the recommissioning is it will become part of the service, but recognising that at any point we might have to remove aspects of it as well. But I think that's the only thing we can do. There is a degree of uncertainty going forward, and that's not just locally, that unfortunately is national as well. But this additional money has allowed the whole sector to make some massive positive changes.
But I think we're building development into annual development plans, and they have to be flexible because we know that, but we need to focus on the things where we know we have the most impact.
Sorry, go on, Lucy.
Can I just come back? So thank you for that.
Val, if you could just
Oh, I'm sorry.
lights off, and then it will go to Lucy.
I don't mind not being seen. It's probably a good thing. Thank you for that. That's really helpful. It sounds as if the impact on service users was minimised, but largely due to the kind of significant efforts that were put in by the provider to make sure that happened. That's important, but not a situation that we can necessarily expect would continue time after time. I'm just wondering whether it is worth us as a committee writing to whoever the right people to write to on this are, to say, actually, this way of managing things is, I mean, I think we can be sympathetic about the fact that it was a new government, that they had a whole pile of difficult stuff to deal with, but that is not a good way of managing things in any kind of service, and particularly in this kind of service where continuity is so important for these service users. So I do just wonder whether it's worth us sending a letter. I know sending a letter is not always that effective, but in the end, last time we sent endless letters from the Combined Authority and from this council and from lots of other ones, and the sense that government was doing lots and lots of short-term funding did reduce slightly. I just think we need to make sure we don't end up back in the same place again quite quickly. So I'm just wondering if it's worth doing that.
I'm just looking at Richard. Is your comment, was that related to this? And then I'll invite Patrick in as well. Go on, Richard.
First of all, I don't disagree with what the leader of the council has said. She chose her words carefully, I thought, and so I'm quite happy to support what she said. But what's missing, both from the report and in this debate, is can we just welcome the fact that 1.5 million extra government money has come that wasn't going to come, and that we sat in this committee last autumn and wrote to the government and said, please, can we have it? And we got it, right? And so there should be some element of saying this is good, right? As well as an element of wanting it to be even better, fine. But there should be some element of that. I believe the council had a statement welcoming it ready, but it didn't ever get issued because of the PERDA period. That's fine. But I think today we should actually just welcome the fact the government's given us more. And could one of the officers just say in lay terms what it is that we're going to be able to do now that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise? Because it's there in the report, but it's all in jargon. So in lay terms that people can understand, what is it that we could do that we couldn't have done otherwise? A couple of other questions, if you don't mind. Sorry, I need to go to my note. In these reports, I really want to see what's different. And it's hard sometimes. And I know it is in there again, and Val tried to introduce it again in her introduction, but it'd be really good if it was clear, because a lot of the good things were already happening and were already the intention, and we should note that. And if it's just rolling it forward, fine. But to the degree that we're changing things, it's important to understand that. Now, there is a list in there. It's all jargon words, right? So extra place-based. What do you mean? I know what you mean by extra place-based, but in practice, are we going to be in 10 venues, not 5? Or what are you talking about there? And then the second one is more assertive model of engagement. So are we going to pin people down? Are we going to hit them if they don't do it? Are we going to go around their house late at night and say, why didn't you turn up? You know, more assertive model of engagement. What on earth does that mean? right? And, please write plain English in these reports and tell us really what's happening. Because if we're going to be more coercive in our services, there will be people who think that's not the right thing, right? And that could be that we're nodding that through in this meeting. So let's understand where there are changes, what those changes are, and I give those 2 examples. Thank you.
Susie or Val, do you want to respond to that before I bring Patrick in?
I think it's oh, sorry. I think it's very I think it's a very good point, because obviously there are some things in there that I think one can sort of take for granted because it's our world. So I think it's a lesson to be taken forward in terms of us. If you want us to go through some examples now, happy to do it, or we can follow up. But if you want it for the public, we can work through
I
something.
think the 2 questions I put, I would like an answer to. Yes, please.
Right. The first one was the assertive 3.16. Thank you. I've moved on to my next page.
Sorry, is this in terms of the new model of delivery? Is that the bit you want to? So in terms of place-based, the service at the moment has got bases across the county and runs clinics. But what we're looking to do is to have workers embedded along with like primary care and integrated neighbourhoods. So people won't have to move that far away from their home, so they can see somebody making in the local GP surgery within the local community. At the moment, there is an expectation for the majority of clients that they will go to their nearest fixed term site, which is a little bit further. So we're trying to make it easier, but making it more community focused in terms of management of care, and not just the drug and alcohol system to manage people, but alongside social care, primary care, and any other kind of health-based services. So it's kind of a team within communities, and that's what we want to achieve. But through the new contract, there's already a step towards that, but we can do more, and that's what we want to achieve. In terms of pinning people down, I don't necessarily would support that, but we do recognise that we have got a small group of individuals who are what we might term treatment resistant. So they have got significant alcohol-related issues. They're in and out of hospitals requiring significant amount of social care, but for whatever reason are not necessarily willing to address their drinking at the moment. So a more assertive approach is to maintain contact, even if people don't want care, is to keep going back and keep asking them to maintain contact with the other services that they're involved in. So there is constant opportunities for people to change their mind.
I think perhaps if the wording would be more that the services deliver a very intensive approach with their service users and always making themselves available and following up between different services. So some sort of narrative behind the wording perhaps would bring it to life.
And in terms of the additional funding, you said, what are we doing with the additional funding? If we didn't have the funding, we couldn't see the many people that we do at the moment. So we've really gone out proactively and improved pathways into treatment. So we've gone out looking for people to come into treatment rather than expecting people to find their own way in. So that's one aspect. We're very proud of the fact that we don't have waiting lists. So that's enabled us by having additional staff that we don't run waiting lists, and we maintain caseloads that are an appropriate size for our key workers. And we've invested more into our workforce. It's a really difficult job working with complex people. So we do need to protect our workforce. We need to make sure they're skilled and they've got enough training. And this additional money has allowed us to do that, as well as funding additional placements and additional medications. And then finally, harm reduction is really important for this client group. I don't know if members are aware, but we've got threats around synthetic opioids at the moment. We've got new drugs coming onto the market. We're seeing an increase nationally in drug-related deaths. So the additional money has meant that we can protect our clients by issuing more naloxone, which is an opiate reversal medication. And so we're getting that out, not just to our service user group, but their friends, their families, and professionals as a first aid measure.
And I think the other important things is that we stress that they have complex needs, and these might be housing, mental health needs. I think the additional funding has enabled the service to work with those services to give a much more comprehensive offer and to meet all their complex needs, which improves their recovery outcomes.
Once again, I'm very satisfied with those answers. Thank you.
Thank you. Patrick, if we can just go back to the suggestion from Lucy about the letter.
Yeah,
Are you
happy to do
comfortable
that.
to do
I was
rather
going to
than-
say that committee did discuss this last year and the risk of not getting the funding. Committee wanted a letter writing, that happened, and it is good news that the funding was received, and it's good to hear from Susie about how that's then been utilised to support the people of Cambridgeshire. But I think on the leader's point, I think it's important that we do draft something and send that back, because I think there's an important point as well, because the public health grant in general often comes at the 11th hour, even well after other budget settlements have been done. And that becomes extremely challenging for the team to be able to think about how that money is used, what the money will be, if there's additional money, etc. So I think an overall form of correspondence that the council could send back on behalf of the committee that would remind them about the importance of prompt notifications, but also on particular grants such as this, that early indication that we get in it, we could also do something. So we can certainly draft it and work with you, Chair, around its content.
That'd be helpful. I got Lewis, but Lucy, you want to come back on that quickly?
Just on the letter, I would be very happy for that letter to include Richard's point about how grateful we are to have the money. I think that is an important point as well. Thank you.
Lewis.
Yeah, absolutely grateful to have the money, Councillor Howard. But these things are so important, especially for what you mentioned. There are new challenges, new drugs, synthetic drugs that are hitting other parts of the world, and we may expect that they will hit us. These things are not solved with emergency fundings on the last minute. We need long-term certainty. A letter is more than needed, and a positive response to that letter is necessary. Now, on that same matter, as a pragmatic topic, how do you ensure, I hear that the provider, CGL, is really good, but how do you ensure that they can, working on short notices, how do you ensure that they can sustain the workforce and other practicalities in the long term if the money is not guaranteed?
I think that is the critical question, essentially. I think there's been many national reports that drug and alcohol services are underfunded, including the Health and Foundation. The strategy, the 2021 strategy, was very much engineered by Dame Carol Black with her investigations into the drug and alcohol services. And it's something we review every year in terms of the impact of funding shortfalls on service users. And it's not just that, because these service users, because of their complex needs, present at so many different services around the system, both local authority and NHS services as well. So it is a system issue as well. They have many, many needs. So I think you've asked the probably central question, is that in terms of need, which we know the need is out there, it's a constant challenge to meet it in the best possible way we can. And it needs constant review, and it needs constant feeding back that basically there are risks to this group, which the whole system will feel. And I missed the criminal justice system out of that as well.
Okay, thank you very much. No other comments, questions? So I think we've had a good debate about this, and thank you very much for all the work that you're doing. As we've heard, it is really good that finally the government did give you the extra grant. It's just disappointing that it didn't come earlier. So we've agreed that we will write a letter. The other three recommendations that the report lists, I'm not going to read those out because they're a bit wordy and we're running out of time, but it looks like we're comfortable with all of those. Yes. So we'll move on to item 8. Thanks, Susie. To item 8, which is the recommissioning of the adult weight management services. And Val, you're going to introduce the report. Thank you.
Yes, and I'm afraid this is another sort of complicated finance issue which relates to national funding. In terms of the background, we commissioned behaviour change services, which includes weight management services. Back in January, this committee approved the recommendation to re-tender the services, and that's currently mid-tender at the moment. Weight management services are part of behaviour change services, and it spans both prevention, but also through to intensive weight management tier 3, known as tier 3 services, which we jointly fund with the Integrated Care Board, the ICB. So we had a value that was approved to take it out to tender. But on the 23rd of December, NICE released its guidance on the latest obesity drug, which I think probably has a lot of coverage in the media and most people are very much aware of. It's complicated, and the paper went to in January. Following on the December NICE guidance, NHS England responded, and that then followed a long negotiation between the ICB, NHS England, and with the involvement of ourselves in terms of how are we going to manage this demand by NICE, because it wasn't just a NICE, the evidence. This was something called a technical appraisal, which means that the ICB has to deliver on the drugs. The problem is they're very expensive, very, very expensive. And the narrative was around, we need to prioritise, and there needs to be a threshold. The other complication is things like right to choose in the NHS, which just added to the narrative. We did finally reach an agreement, but I think it could possibly change, and reached an agreement on their funding. The ICB wants to maintain its funding, continue to jointly fund with these intensive weight management services, which we've always commissioned them on their behalf, but also introduce this new drug. We already do prescribe through our commission service, one of the earlier GLP-1 obesity drugs. And this is, I think it's been given, it's a high profile drug, it's a must do. So unfortunately, we'd already started, we had to start the recommission because we have to have a new service in place by October the 1st. So this is coming to committee now, June, mid-procurement, to ask support for the request that we add in, or we vary the new contract when it's awarded to accommodate the inclusion of these drugs, which we couldn't do beforehand because it had been approved. And again, it's that late notification about funding, and they just don't marry up. I think the funding would be the same kind of flexibility that we just described in the drug and alcohol condition, that the amount of 3.22 million would built into it, but the provider would not receive that unless we had that funding that came down from the centre via the ICB. There's a lot of unknowns to it, because I think there's the whole issue around the obesity drugs is very controversial at many levels, and the affordability is questionable. There's a lot of work being undertaken at the moment to work through the cost effectiveness of having these drugs, this latest iteration as well, this latest drug, which is happening at the moment. But I suppose the recommendation is that they are here at the moment. We have to build it into our services. So to approve the recommendation that we have a flexible approach. And just as another caveat built into it as a safeguard, currently our commission services accesses the drugs through a commercial pharmacy arrangement. That's quite expensive, but it means it's not in the contract. It is much cheaper to build it into the contract and use the NHS route. And the NHS route is something called BlueTech, but it will monitor whatever Cambridgeshire resident patient is prescribed this drug. It will be fed back to the ICB, and the provider will only be paid on the basis of the number of prescriptions that they've issued. So that there are two safeguards in it. One, we'll know very much that we can control the prescribing of the drug, and And secondly, we can pay, basically it's more on a unit cost as we proceed to the contract.
Okay, thank you very much, Val. Any comments, questions on Lucy and then Anna?
Just very briefly, again, you have my sympathy in trying to deal with this one, Val. It does sound like a kind of contract and procurement nightmare. I think it's important to say that actually, if these drugs do what they claim to do, there are potentially also enormous savings for the NHS and care services and a whole range of other organisations, and a much better quality of life for some people. So on the whole, I really hope that this is successful and that the drugs are successful and they do all the things they say they're going to do. I have to say I am not entirely sure whether using them for some of the people who most need them is going to be as straightforward as it is in some other places, because there are side effects which I believe are quite uncomfortable, and some people may be more willing than others to put up with that. However, I think it's really important that they are available, because for some people they might be life-changing. So thank you for doing the work on it, and good luck with the next steps.
I agree with Lucy, and it goes back to one of the questions David raised earlier about how we can get some benefit on money back from the NHS because of all the preventative work which you and colleagues are doing through this and other initiatives.
Can I just comment on that? I think that we should not forget with the drugs that wider preventative work is so essential, because the drugs are life-saving, but actually, people obviously it will have therapeutic approach cardiovascular disease, but also that wider thing. People need to be physically active. They need to be doing other things as well. That holistic looking at health. So we can't take our foot off the pedal off that wider preventative agenda either.
No, great, Anna.
Thank you. And in fact, that comes back to what I wanted to talk about. And I just wanted to say that I think this behaviour change, the whole concept of behaviour change, is really important, because, as you say, it's being active and mobile that helps most people keep their weight down. I appreciate there are some for whom that is difficult and they do need these drugs. And I'm glad that it's being considered as part of a more holistic service and not just this on its own. Because actually what that does is it ties you to the drug. If you only keep your weight down by taking the drug, it means you're not, as soon as if you go off the drug, then your weight goes back up again. And also the side effects that Councillor Nessinger mentioned. But basically, I think in principle, there is an element of this which is useful, and that apart from the fact that it will help people lose weight, but it's the fact that if we do it as part of the contract, we will be able to, it will be possible to monitor who's taking it and for how long, and it means that there'll be perhaps more evidence in the pot about whether it works, how well it works. I mean, obviously, NICE wouldn't have recommended it if it didn't work, but it means that there'll be more data available about its efficacy and its use and its usability and practicability. So whilst it's an uncomfortable position to be in more ways than one, I do support the funding. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just the point on behaviour change is that it's so important, and all the evidence says that if you are prescribed the drugs, you need a course of the behaviour change. So built into the treatment package is that what now is called wraparound behaviour change services.
David and then Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Can you just clarify something for me on the legal implications in 6.2? Why would we have to take account of 2p in this agreement?
To help Val, it says the contract will be drafted to take account of 2p and local government reorganisation. Provisions will also be included to ensure compliance with data protection legislation.
because it's part of the wider behaviour change service as well. So the staff that are in the current service, which provide intensive weight management services, then the contract needs to take account of that as well. It's part of the process, the commissioning process and procurement process. So it was added in there as a sort of standard that we would when we were writing about a contract.
Bridget.
Thank you, Councillor, for that helping me out on there.
Richard.
I welcome this report. I particularly welcome the fact that we're going to carry on doing this and Peterborough aren't, which rather shows that this is a council that we can be proud of. So that's great. Sorry, Peterborough friends. In terms of the detail of the report, I'm particularly looking forward to the findings of the research work that we've funded on behavioural change. And I suspect this is entirely separate from that, but both includes the words behavioural change. But especially for new members of the committee, I think it'd be good if there could be just some comment about that, because I think behavioural change is what it's all about, but it's damn difficult to do. And that's what we're wrestling with when we read reports like this and support services do it. On the weight loss drug, it's a big decision. You know, most of us, or many of us, will have this morning been listening to the radio and hearing that a drug that does help people stop the development of their dementia can't be afforded by the NHS, which if I had a relative suffering from dementia, I wouldn't be welcoming. But these are the tough, difficult, real-life decisions that have to be made. There's a whole debate going on in the national media about whether we can afford the weight loss drug and whether it's the right way to tackle long-term prevention issues, which I'm following. I'm open-minded about, in truth. I don't have a strong view. I think you have to listen to the evidence. But this appears to be a critical moment when we as a county council take a decision about that. And I think there is a danger that this just slips through without people noticing that, although I think some of the discussion already has acknowledged it. But I would have liked in the report to see a serious discussion of the alternatives. If we don't use the weight loss drug, what would we do instead? And what are the relative merits of the different approaches that leads us to recommend using the drug? And it'd be interesting to get that answer, at least in brief, because I'm sure it's a big issue, but at least in brief this morning. Secondly, I think we need to acknowledge in the report that a lot of this is still subject to funding that our friends in the Integrated Care Board have not yet confirmed. And I think we need to hear a bit more about when we were expecting that confirmation, when we now are expecting that confirmation, if the pending changes in the Integrated Care Board, because they're going to be completely reorganised, if they are affecting this and other potential funding and partnerships that we're involved. Now, I know that's a wider question than just this funding, but as the funding is dependent on the ICB, I think we need to hear that. I fundamentally think that tackling obesity is part of a preventative approach on healthcare, and I think it's great. It's one of the 4 priorities in the health and wellbeing strategy, and so I fundamentally do support this and give strong support to it, and so I wouldn't want my questions to be misunderstood in that context.
Okay, thank you. Val, do you...
Yes, in terms of, well, I don't think I can recreate the sort of nice dialogue here, information here. But I think what drives the drugs that we know they have an impact, people lose weight on it. Okay, there are lots of discussions about longer term impacts, which are an unknown, but that's probably true of many, many drugs. I think the imperative for their use at the moment is that they're relatively quick. I think we have people presenting at services, both social care and NHS services, at an unprecedented rate in obesity-related conditions. We have over 60% of the population who are either overweight or obese. So it's just such a huge challenge, and we know these have a quick impact. Behaviour change takes longer, definitely. But it worries me that I think that these drugs are for life at the moment. So I think it does need careful consideration because of that, because when people, that comes back to, and it's a narrative that's going on at the moment, and the pushback is in terms of, can we, and I think there's an awful lot of evidence that it can impact. Certainly it's intuitive enough, it's observational, that you can see people as they lose weight, the risk of the main cardiovascular risk decreases. But, and I think that what is driving it. But, and I think that evidence is there for its clinical outcomes. There's a lot of evidence for its cost-effective outcomes. And I think the pushback is very much on, we don't know the longer-term outcomes as yet. But there's pretty strong evidence that the drugs work. But in terms of affordability for 60% of the population, I think then it becomes quite a difficult discussion. We have had the funding conferred by the ICB. It was a continuation. We've had fund. We commissioned it because historically we bought the funding from the NHS when we transferred across in 2013, and we kept it. They never wanted it back, so we've always commissioned it on their behalf. With the increased demand over the past few years, they've augmented their contribution towards the Tier 3 service, and that has been confirmed. And we've already modified the Section 76 that supports that. I think the last question about local government reform, I think all the discussion we've had previously applies here as well. The added complexity when you jointly fund a service will add another dimension to it, but it's not just this service. I think it's many services as well.
Okay, thank you. Richard, are you content with those answers?
Very, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments, David?
Yeah, thank you. I think what Councillor Howard was rather wisely going in the direction of was the need for adult health in diet control. And I mean, it's now in the media, there's Tulloch Brothers, there's Zoe Apps. I think this is a really important part of this whole business, this whole problem, if you like, that we have. I mean, these drugs, Wegovy, that we're talking about, I know do have some serious side effects. So we need to spend money on adult education in proper diets. That's my view. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments, questions? No. Thank you very much.
Just pick up on Councillor Howard's point about he alluded to a behaviour insights research which we commissioned from Sheffield University. This has been an 18-month piece of research. We've completed the first stage of the research, and part of the commission was that they did 3 proof of concept. So they took we had 21 recommendations. Recommendations about what are the barriers and enablers for behavioural change, and what are the levers that we can use in our social environment, economic environment to influence those behaviours. So out of those 21 recommendations, we've identified 3 which are being taken forward as proof of concept. And in November, we have planned, best way to describe it, a workshop conference on event where the findings will be presented, and we'll be inviting a whole range of people to discuss the implications for particular services as well.
I just wonder whether spokes from this committee might be invited to that. Yeah, but if we specifically invited, so we notice it, I think that would be particularly interesting.
You content with that, Val? Yeah. Okay. She's nodding enthusiastically. Thank you very much. Okay. No other comments, questions? Yeah, go on, Louis.
I think, Councillor Howard, the discussion wasn't whether this is a strategy for a whole population to administer drugs and that's how we solve a problem. I think that would hardly be a solution long term. So I understand this is only for those more acute cases. There is a whole range of how do you justify who gets it and who doesn't. Councillor Levin, it's right that we need a holistic approach to solve the causes of this problem. So that is just a comment, but maybe I can second that.
Yes, I think that it's not, we do prioritize, and we have, one of the things that I haven't gone into in the paper is that the prioritization of people with a high BMI and certain comorbidities, so diabetes, for example. So basically where it will have the most impact. But in terms of that wider population, it is we can't, as I said earlier, we can't take our foot off the pedal in terms of all the interventions, all the preventative interventions, which are very wide ranging. And I think it is the one public health challenge, well, not one, but it is probably the premier public health challenge where you require the whole system to contribute to addressing it.
Final point, Anna.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, going back to your very extensive report at 2.5, you remind us that it's that the providing weight management services is mandated to comply with the guidance, and the guidance says we must offer this drug. So, and it says the ICB must ensure that the new drug, tirpetoside, is prescribed from April 2025. So this is something we must do, and I think that we've acknowledged that in our discussion.
Busy ensuring that everything's in place at the moment, that we will start prescribing tirzepatide in the services.
Okay.
For that cohort.
Okay, thank you very much. So we just move to the recommendations. If nobody else got any other comments, I'm not going to read these out in full, but the committee is recommended to approve the total increase of up to £3.6 million until the 30th of March 2028 in the value of the behaviour change contract. Subcontract to accommodate the cost of the new obesity drugs. All the funding for the drug is from the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Integrated Care Board. Secondly, the value of the approved behaviour change service procurement of £12.47 million over 7 years, commencing the 1st of October 2025. And again, that will be subject to the ICB receiving, passing over the money. And finally, item C, delegate responsibility for awarding and executing a contract variation for the provision of obesity drugs starting on the 1st of October 2025 until 30th of March 2028. Are we all comfortable with those recommendations?
Agreed.
Yeah. Oh, Anna, go on. Yeah.
I was just saying, yes, I agree.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much. So we approved. Go on.
I'd like to abstain if that's okay.
Problem. Okay. We just note that. Thanks, Steve. Move on to item 9. So thanks, Val. Item 9 is the finance monitoring report with the outturn for 2024-25. The report will be introduced by Patrick Warren Higgs, the Executive Director for Adults Health and Commissioning, and Justin Hartley has joined us, is the Strategic Finance Manager, is also available. Patrick.
Thank you, Chair. So the report provides an update for the committee on the financial position for the Adults Health and Commissioning Directorate, which includes public health, as at the end of the financial year 24-25. Financial monitoring reports are produced monthly, except for April, by all services, and budgets for services are agreed by full council in the business plan in February of each year, but can be amended throughout the year. The finance monitoring report, which is contained here, has a number of key sections. Section 1 is around a summary of the table on the responsibilities. Section 5 is some of the key activity data for adult services, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail about how those principal drivers that impact on our financial position. Appendices are then contained within the financial monitoring report. 1 to 3 are around the detailed financial position by service. Appendix 4 is around the sum of the savings for Adults Health and Commissioning Directorate for the 24-25 business plan, and particularly those savings not achieved and are brought forward from previous years. And Appendix 5 just contains information on earmarked reserves, grants income and budget variance, which contains some of the requests for committee around the public health reserves. The overall position for Adults Health and Commissioning budgets at the end of the 2024-25 financial year was an underspend of just over £7 million, £7,078,000. That's equivalent to 3% of the annual budget for that particular directorate. That includes an underspend for public health of £506,000, equivalent to 1.2%. The table at 3.1.1 shows the detailed breakdown across the different service heads within the Directorate. The major reason for the underspend on service was that net growth in the early months of the year for particularly older people was significantly below budget. Growth and our forecasting around the modelling that we use to predict what our expenditure and demand will be as a result of that is around bed-based care and domiciliary care. And we expected it for levels that would continue into the financial year. But what happened was that the growth in net home care numbers remained low, and the numbers of bed-based care levelled off, stayed at low levels and levelled off. So what that did, that offset the lower level of income that we expected, the lower level of spend that we expected. And a lot of that was due to a spike in COVID levels that we saw impacting on our population. As a result of lower numbers of people that we support, we naturally see a lower level of income from a result from charging, because we've got a reduced number of people in receipt of services, and that shift in numbers was largely then driven by higher numbers of packages ending rather than lower numbers of people coming through in terms of our demand. So our demand didn't change, but the numbers of people in receipt of services did. That created a significant underspend on the service. However, the underspend would have been larger not for some partial overspend in particular services. So adults with a learning disability and those with mental health continue to have above average costs, and therefore that was impacting on our overall spend, and that reduced the overall underspend to the 7,078,000 that you're seeing today. 3.14 goes into some of the key factors that impacted in 24-25 and really continue to impact on the way that we manage our budget. So demand is difficult to predict and can vary significantly from month to month, depending on the numbers of people that we're supporting, the numbers of people waiting to be assessed, the cost and the acuity of needs for those people, and the fees that we're paying for care and support that we're accessing. We had a challenging set of service targets in 24-25, and progress against those was reported quarterly. And whilst many were delivered in full, there were some challenges around under-delivery against some of those savings targets. Recruitment remained challenging, and vacant posts led to underspends against staffing budget. And overall, the council was in a significant financial challenging position, and we continued to support the corporate pressures that we were seeing by managing our vacancies proactively in terms of filling posts in a timely way. We saw the separation from the public health team from Peterborough City Council during the year, and it raised some of the staffing risks that public health saw. Pressures with the provider market continued to be felt, particularly relating to fee rates. Providers continued to report cost pressures, and inflationary pressures were seen in terms of some of the uplifts that we applied. And then the position of the care market, particularly around specific types of provision and location, continues to make some placements difficult to source, and that has an impact on some of the prices that we are looking to pay for when we're making some of the particular placements that we want. The second part of the report from 3.2 provides an update on adult social care debt, which has been a significant piece of work in terms of a deep dive within the council due to the levels of debt. This report gives an outline of some of the work that's been done. So the overdue debt stands at 21 million at the end of March, down from 21.5 million in February. There's been a significant amount of work done on it. Our overall debt position has risen as a result of growth, but we've also seen an increase in billing. So debt has risen by 9%. Our context of our billing has increased by 13.5%. So we've actually seen a reduction in the levels of debt, albeit it shows in numerical terms as increasing. Overdue debt with health partners was another issue, which this committee received updates and reports about, which at the end of March was 17.5 million, down from 17.8 at the end of February. Most of that debt was related to the Learning Disability Partnership, which the council separated from the 1st of April. However, we've done an extensive work with ICB partners, and resolution has subsequently been reached on the amounts to be paid, and we are seeing that levels of debt decrease, and we expect to see that continue to decrease through this financial year, and committee will receive reports throughout the year to provide that assurance. In terms of the public health reserves, Sally may want to add some further comments here, but the position on public health reserves is set out in Appendix 5. Section 5.3.2 of the monitoring report shows that the total levels of reserves total 3.5 million, including $500,000 transferred into public health reserves from the in-year underspend. However, there are some proposals around use of some of the public health grant from last financial year, which is sitting within the reserves. So subsequent to that exercise, we want to reduce the amount down further as a result of identifying some areas of spend within the public health grant. They've considered options for usage of those uncommitted reserves, and the table in 3.3.3 and subsequent explanations outline the areas that we would want to use some of the allocated public health reserves. 3.3.4 is where the detailed reserves. Justine's joined me, as always. Thanks to Justine and the team, who have a huge role to play and support for myself and the Directorate in managing this budget. But I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Patrick. Any comments, questions? David?
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested in the debt because I've not seen debt shown this way before. Previously in business, it's always been aged 30, 60, 90, 120. Obviously, the older the debt gets, the more risk you've got. I was just intrigued why it's presented this way, and do we have that information as well?
We do have that information. The challenge we have is that debt is reported through to the Accounts and Audit Committee for scrutiny on the age debt. We bring it here as part of our information within our FMR, and we show it here, but we do have it contained within our age debt. And as you say, the longer the debt is, the more challenging it becomes to recover, and that's been some of our focus. We've been proactive in terms of the response to our deep dive. We've been proactive in the response to recovering outstanding income before it reaches a level of debt, chasing up debt within 12 months, but then also targeting particular parts of our age debt. Some of it's relating to deceased estates and recovering that from probate. Some of it's around applications that we need to make to the Court of Protection in terms of accessing funds for people who don't have the capacity to manage funds. So there's been some various different aspects, and that's all categorised and recorded within the debt monitoring process. I don't know whether Justine wants to add anything further.
Yeah, thank you. So there is a table as well in 3.2.4, which is sort of trying to address that issue and place particular focus on debt over a year old, and which we had been seeing growing quite sort of steadily, and the work around the debt dive has been really, a lot of it's been focused on that older debt. We've been sort of trying to address it from both ends, both at the sort of early stage and to try to address some of that later stage debt. So we can certainly look at different ways of reporting it going forwards, but that graph was very much put in to try to, you know, sort of show the journey of progression for that older level debt, which, as you say, is the older it gets, the harder it is to collect.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, that would be, for me, if it was, I saw the bar charts for the debts in the different ages, would probably be easier than the graph that I'm looking at.
Is that something you're happy to present, Justine?
I already have those graphs, but
Yeah,
just not in this particular.
We saw that adults audit and accounts with David, so there's no reason why it shouldn't be represented here. The one thing on debt, and then I come to Lucy, that I forgot to ask at audit and accounts was, it's excellent that we're settling with the NHS a lot of the outstanding debt. Have we had to write off any debt that the NHS is saying it's nothing to do with us, Gov, and we don't want to have any dealings with it, or are they generally accepting of everything we're saying?
Do you want to answer that, Patrick, in terms of the LD? I mean, I think generally most of the debt is there is a debt with the NHS tends to be quite difficult because there's some long-standing debt that takes quite difficult. It's quite difficult to resolve. What happens is they pay what they think they owe, we bill what we think they owe, and sometimes that doesn't come together because changes and care and support plans, communication channels have to be really robust to make that really easy to do. So there is a sort of an issue, and we did have a debt resolution generally across all adult social care debt back in 2020. And we're trying to improve the processes to make that a slicker process going forwards. But I think Patrick might want to answer on the specific issue of LD, which is the one that's really at the forefront of our minds at the moment.
Thanks, Justine. So the position with the LD debt was that there was this was a form of a pool fund. So there was money put in by the council and money put in by the ICB. We'd established that the ICB owed us a significant amount of money. It's about £31 million. They felt that they didn't owe us that. There was a lot of discussions and negotiation, and I think we reached a settled point. Some of that we will offset the gap by reserves, but some of it may be that we will contain that in a report, or I think it's Strategy and Resources Committee, which will be a request for write-off. But I don't know the detail of the timing of that, and there are still some discussions with the ICB on that, Chair. So I can't confirm at the moment whether there will be a write-off paper, but I expect there will be.
Okay, and that will go to Strategy, Resources and Performance rather than to here for information.
Yeah, can I just add to that though? We know there's settlement amounts. We have set aside provision for all of those amounts within our account. So you won't see a pressure coming through in the finance monitoring report in 25-26 as a result of that, because we've already allowed for everything that we expect to be in that final settlement amount.
Yes, that's understandable, but I just wanted to be clear, if we are writing off some of this, what we thought was debt that we hoped was recoverable, that how that's being reported back to a committee. Anyway, I'll leave it there and we'll see what comes back to a relevant committee. Lucy and then Anna.
Thank you. So yeah, lots of bits to pick up on this. Firstly, I want to say thank you and congratulations and also commiserations to Patrick and Richard and everybody who's been involved in the ongoing painful saga of the learning disability debt. And my goodness, that's been horrible and really hard work. And it is so frustrating that actually if we could have had an agreement about the money months and months ago, that whole process would have been so much less difficult and probably significantly less bad for a lot of service users in this case as well. But anyway, thank you for getting to the position that we now seem to be in, where they have paid most of that money. Just to pick up Graham's point about where the conclusion of that will come, I'm guessing that there will be a paper that will come to Strategy and Resources. I think there is absolutely no reason why that paper couldn't also be sent to all members of this committee. I think you probably won't want to discuss it at this committee because it's a paper that will be for Strategy and Resources to discuss, but it will be of interest to many people here. So perhaps we can just ask Rashenda to note that when that comes forward to Strategy and Resources, it should be sent for information to all the members of the Adults and Health Committee. I also wanted to ask some questions about the other debt. So there's the learning disability NHS debt, which I know quite a lot about. I don't want to have any more information about that. On the deep dive on the other debt, which I think is probably largely debt from families of people who need, well, or individuals who need care. It would be interesting to know whether there are patterns that you have found while doing that work in which cases end up causing us problems with debt, and thinking about what we can do early on to try and make sure that, I mean, because those debt situations are bad for the council, but they're often also very stressful for the families concerned, and it is often families who are dealing with this rather than individuals. Sometimes those are families of people who no longer have capacity to make decisions. Sometimes they're families of people who have died. I'm quite interested to know how much of that debt is from people who were actually only needing care for a relatively short time, and whether that's one of the kind of flags for when debts are not settled and the finances are not sorted. So I think that there's an important kind of follow-on piece from that deep dive that you've done into those debt cases to look for patterns and to think about what we as a council can do to make sure that those debt situations don't recur, if that makes sense. I think that's probably more a question for Patrick, but thank you.
So we do have the information. I don't know whether or not we have the information around the kind of length of care somebody was in receipt of, but I'm sure we can do that because the deep dive went into some great detail. I suppose in terms of patterns and learning, I think there are a number of different aspects of learning that we've taken from this. So the first one I think is around our practice and around being very clear to people that services, unlike the NHS services that people access through adult social care, is subject to a financial assessment. And I think there's something about giving people an opportunity to be aware of that much earlier on than maybe conversations sometimes. It's a difficult one, and actually families and the individual, you want to know more about the care and support before you get to the financials. We're doing some work around use of technology to help people to do a kind of and other councils do a light touch financial assessment. You can do that yourself online, and that gives you an understanding. So things like that help around understanding what to pay. That's one bit. The second bit is around capacity, because if the first time we meet somebody is coming out of hospital, they may not know where all their bank details are, what the benefits rates are, where the benefit goes, etc. There might be families that support them, and some families don't really know about a person's financial circumstances. So if people don't have capacity, the timing of all of the paperwork that's needed to submit to the Court of Protection or to identify who's been appointed, if somebody else has been appointed to manage finances, can often take time, and all the time that debt is building up. That's another one. Interestingly, we looked at a report this week around deferred payments. So deferred payments is where you don't want to sell your property, but in effect you enter into an agreement with the council that the council pays your fees and then charges off the property, and when the property is sold. I think we said we went through 57 direct payment agreements, but actually in the end there was only 4 that were signed. So during the time you're going through establishing that, which is a long drawn out, it's a legal process where you're going through and drawing up legal agreements for 53 people, they will then suddenly owe that levels of debt that you've been building up over the weeks while you've been working on that. So that's another aspect. And then unfortunately, when people pass away, if there is a debt owed, then that doesn't pass to families, but it sits on the estate, and we often sometimes have to wait for the estate. So that combination of all those factors, that's where the deep dive, there was a lot of work done. The other one was we had a backlog within financial assessments, and we've worked hard to get that backlog down to a much more manageable number. But if you've not financially assessed somebody for 6 months, when you calculate that, you've got a 6-month bill that people then say, well, I've not got that money, I've spent it. So again, that had another impact. So the deep dive brought all this to the surface, and there have been actions right across there about how do we improve it, both in terms of the team that are responsible for the debt and income collection that sit within finance and corporate services, financial resources. And then we've got teams within adults health and commissioning, which are around some of our practice and the conversations and the way that we gather information and share that with families. So I think we've done a lot of that, but we will take as an action just to look at the pattern of people and the length of stay for certain people, and whether or not that's a factor. I don't know if Justine wants to add anything further.
Yeah, so I was just going to say that the vast majority of the adult social care debt relates to the older people client cohort, because they tend to be the ones who've got more money, they've got the assets, they've got the etc. So a lot of the debt sits around for a long time because of, when it goes through probate or it goes through Court of Protection, it can sit there for for 2 years or so. Patrick's talked about those deferred payment agreements. This is a cohort that generally doesn't stay in our services for all that long period of time, and so circumstances can change. People die during that process, and it gets difficult. Addressing that financial assessment backlog, I think, has really helped, because we were in a position where we had debts going back quite a long way, and it's quite difficult when you get those, particularly when circumstances can be difficult anyway. So having that much more up to date is helping. But yes, it is generally our older people cohort that this debt relates to, because they're the ones who've got the ability to pay.
Thank you for that. I think that was really helpful. I'm not quite sure how much the previous committee had been kind of gone through all of that process of the outcomes from the deep dive work. But I think regardless of whether you've covered it in vast detail in the previous one, I think it would probably be quite helpful for this committee to have a briefing note about what that work was and what the changes in practice have been as a result of it. I would certainly find it really useful to see that. So if we could have that, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
I agree. We'll get that sorted, Lucy. I'm conscious we've been going for just over 2 hours. I've got a couple more speakers on this, and then I think we'll adjourn for 10 minutes and then do the final papers. Richard and then Anna.
First of all, on the LDP, I appreciate what Councillor Nethsing has said. I think it's very important to say today that if there was a major breakthrough and some very tough talking between the ICB and the County Council, but in the end, a just settlement was reached. And although what has been discussed in the debate today is about papers and reports going properly through the council to acknowledge that, which of course is terribly important, the big picture thing is that a very long running dispute which put the services of people with learning disabilities at threat and was a significant financial problem for this council, where we'd spent money in good faith and then we're not receiving what we regarded as the just proportion of that from the health service, that problem was successfully solved by very skillful negotiation by our officers, and let's acknowledge a constructive response from our health partners. And I would want to pay credit to the Executive Director, Patrick Warren-Higgs, and also to the Chief Executive, Stephen Moyer, who have played a leading role in turning that round, and which when I hear from them in private, and you'll hear from them in private, Councillor Wilson, I think they've got the relationship to a different place in a way that isn't just resolving a runoff problem in the past, but will hopefully prevent that happening in the future. And I can't tell you how delighted I am by that. And in the end, that's about securing the future of services for people with learning disabilities and their families. And we shouldn't forget that. My questions on the change in trend on older people's demand that Patrick Warren-Higgs talked about. For new members of the committee, this is a huge issue that the past committee dealt with. There was, in round figures, something like £10 million. I think it's 7 million in the end. But anyway, a multi-million saving, which Norfolk and Suffolk and Essex weren't seeing, and where our officers have spent months and months trying to work out, is something wrong there, or our services reaching elderly people, and it is just a different situation here in Cambridgeshire. And they essentially came to the conclusion that people who need services are getting them, which obviously we would strongly welcome, but we have to be very alert about that. And that those figures are big as a proportion of the entire council budget, not just the budget for this committee. So they're really, really important. What happened, and I read in this report, what I read is that the trend of the lower demand was earlier in the financial year. And I remember being told, and I'm reading this report, that it sort of returned to a normal trend pattern nearer the end of the year. And so my question is, have I understood that correctly? Because I think we if it has, then the potential savings that the council will desperately want, no doubt, this year may not be there. But I think it's important that we hear the answer to that. Sorry, I need to go to my note for the other questions. I apologise for a slight delay. I will just say in passing that it's it's a happy coincidence that almost all of the savings of public health, which are being reallocated, are going to substitute services for adult social care, and to remind all of the officers that the public health money is ring-fenced for public health, and I am sure that the money is being contributing to public health objectives, but we should be watching that to make sure that it's not just being used to fill a black hole in the finances. But I want to strongly welcome the one bit of that money which isn't used for substitution, which is for population health management. I think this is really good. I think I'm sure that's an initiative of the new Director of Public Health. I think we're struggling for time, so I won't ask for a big explanation about that now, but I do want to place on record my strong support for that work.
Okay, thank you very much. And Anna, unless Justin, you wants to come back on that?
I'm happy to answer the OP demand question first, if that's sense, or wait and do them both together.
Let's have Anna's final question, and then you can wrap up, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. It's just it's a question about procedure and engaging with people early. I had a case in my division where a person who had been in hospital came home with a care package, which she understood initially was provided by the hospital, and there was some early engagement regarding her ability to pay. And there was a bit of confusion there, which then ended up with her continuing to receive the care package for some years before I think County finally caught up with the fact that she needed to pay for it. They were happy to pay, but hadn't been asked to. And so there was a degree of catching up there. And I just wanted to make sure that we do engage with service users early on to avoid that kind of confusion, because that's possibly what is contributing to this sort of debt. And the question I actually wanted to ask was, whilst I see the pattern of the lines, I have no idea what 366 to 730 at 3.2.4, 366 to 730 and 730 plus. Is that the number of months the debt has been out of date, or I really don't know what that means. So, but the main thing was to make sure that we deal with service users as individuals, because this couple were perfectly happy to pay, but had not been contacted about it, and then ended up with a very, very large bill, which they then said, please, they asked me for my help to engage with the authority to actually ensure that they could pay in a staged way over several years, which we managed to sort out. And in fact, Patrick Higgs may remember, because I engaged with him about it at the time. It's some years ago now, but it might be that kind of thing that's adding to this rather large debt figure.
Okay. You may or may not be able to answer that, but let's, Justin, do you want to start?
I'll go
and then
first.
Patrick will just wrap up.
Okay, so I'll go back to Councillor Howart's question about OP demand. Did it return back? Did it stay? It sort of did, but then, older people demand for some reason at the moment, post-COVID, seems to be really, really difficult to predict. So it kind of slowed off again at year end as well. Really important for the committee to know that as part of business planning, the underspend that we had last year, we took away through the budget, so it won't be there for 25-26. And we look again at the cohort that we had at the 31st of March, the cohort that we brought into this financial year, and we assess the budget on that basis. So just so you're aware of that. But older people, well, all of their care cohorts, in honesty, are quite difficult to predict demand-wise. Mental health is another one that's quite difficult. It goes up and down. The packages are quite expensive, and it's a relatively small number of packages. So a couple of packages can turn things around quite quickly. So it is a constant challenge to get those demand forecasts right. And they are always our sort of best estimates. But older people so far this year seems to be holding itself. So hopefully that'll be okay as we go through the year. In terms of the 366 to 730, apologies, that's days. So that's 1 year to 2 years or 2 years, but I completely can understand that it's not explicit in the graph. So I'll make sure that that is changed for future graphs. In terms of what we do, Patrick, do you want to answer the question about what practitioners do when people are being discharged from hospital, etc.?
So people that come out of hospital who need some form of support are entitled to up to 6 weeks intermediate care, and that is free at the point of delivery. That's about trying to get somebody home and optimized and maximized in terms of their independence. Some people during that period, we've got a really good success record within Cambridgeshire. People get turned around and they don't need any further care and support, and they continue to be independent without any intervention. Other people need some support, and when that happens, there's a relationship then between the provider of that intermediate care, be it the NHS or the council, and then steps on to being the council step in and undertake assessments as per the legislation. That example that you give there, I would say is not the norm. The norm is that there is a referral from the teams that are intervened, the teams that have been supported for up to 6 weeks. They know the process, they make referrals, and then people step in, do an assessment, and if there are financial implications as a result of an outcome of their assessment, then charges are then levied. I mean, I don't know. I can recall that one. I would say that was a one-off rather than the norm, because we can see that the numbers coming out of hospital, we understand about the levels of demand because we see it in other ways, and we track it in other ways in terms of people coming out, the levels of demand on our service and the amount of income that we're expecting to come in. And they're often used as part of a measure in terms of our levels of activity and demand, both from the community but also post-discharge from hospital.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Any other final comments? No. So we move to the report recommendations. The committee is recommended to note the outturn report for 24-25, note the update on adult social care debt, and we've said we'd like more information on that. And we endorse the allocation of £1.4 million of unallocated public health reserves to support public health priorities as set out in the paper, subject to the agreement of SRMP committee. Are we all happy with that? Content? Yes, thank you very much. So I suggest we have a quick break now. It's 17 minutes past 12 according to my computer. If we come back at 12:30 promptly, we'll deal with Sally's paper on the public health strategic plan and the last couple of items. So I'm hoping we will still finish at 1 o'clock, Sally. Thank you. Thank you everybody for coming back so promptly. It's 12:30, so I think we'll make a start. We're on to item 10, which is the Public Health Strategic Plan for 2025 to 30. And the report is introduced by Sally Cartwright, the Director of Public Health. Steve, you ready? Steve? Sally's on.
Thank you. So I will talk through the document in brief and then open up to any questions, but this is a strategic plan item, which is for discussion and comment and review, and it will then go through and be further developed. So comments and discussion welcome. What it does is lays out the core elements and strategic focus for our public health work programme over the next 5 years, particularly focusing on what we will achieve in the next year. And underpinning that, the proposal is to have a whole council approach to health equity and ill health prevention, and thinking about what that might mean for the whole council going forwards. So there is a sort of Word document version of some of the content and then some slides that follow, which I will talk to the slides briefly. Not slide by slide, but just give a bit of an overview of some of the core content. So there's lots of data and understanding of population need that underpins the work of the public health team, and there's just a few key bullet points in the slides. But there's lots more data behind that will come out in various reports and other needs assessments and documentation that can be viewed behind it as well. But just some of the key headlines of what we're trying to make a difference on is around inequalities in health outcomes and life expectancy and healthy life expectancy that we see across the county, sorry. Long-term conditions, which are a growing issue nationally and locally as well, cardiovascular disease particularly. Obesity, which we talked about a bit already, but that's a key specific health challenge that we need to be looking at both for adults and young people. Mental health and well-being, smoking and preventable mortality from smoking, as well as other reasons, but again, cardiovascular disease and health inequalities around that really important, and health and employment. And just a reminder then, looking at page 176 of the full pack, some of the core principles of public health and the way in which public health work and what we are all about as a specialty area of work is around some of the key elements of this is around focusing on ill health prevention. So what can we do to prevent ill health from happening? Thinking about health inequalities through all that we do. So where different groups of society and the population have poorer health outcomes, and particularly why that might be and how we can adjust what we're doing collectively to make a difference on that. Using data and intelligence to understand population need and focus on actions that we know will have a greater impact. Using the evidence base again to ensure that we're using best practice and maximising our impact. Keeping a community and neighbourhoods close to what we're doing and making sure that services are accessible and appropriate for the community, and working in partnership. So public health doesn't work on its own. We work in partnership across the NHS, across voluntary sector and other partners to make sure that we are having a whole system approach to what we are trying to do. So the strategic focus has been developed working with the public health team and across the council around what we need to be focusing on. Our core ambition across all of this is around improving healthy life expectancy and reducing the gap in life expectancy. So again, that health inequalities element's really important through actions focused on prevention of ill health across all ages. And then what we're proposing is 4 pillars of work that will tackle that to address that goal. Best start in life about young people, ensuring preventative approach and building resilience. A healthy place to live and work, so recognising that the issues that impact on somebody's health and well-being are really around how they're living and working through all that they're doing. So thinking about income, education, employment, housing, healthy place and the environment in which somebody's living and the impact that has on their health and well-being. addressing complex needs, so improving equity for those with more complex needs. We heard already today about the drug and alcohol service, so that's one element of this, but some of those groups of society that have the more complicated needs and ensuring that they are not left behind through the work that we're doing. And then ill health prevention, so system-wide actions to tackle some of those core drivers of ill health, obesity, physical activity, smoking, poor mental health. The next few slides just outline how this work fits with the wider council approach and other strategies across the directorate and other directorates. So it's really sort of interplays with lots of other pieces of work across the council. And then some of the key partners and partnerships that we work within for delivery of this. The next few slides, I'm not going to go into in detail, which is around some of the key actions in year one of this strategic plan that the public health team will be leading on and delivering against to meet these aims, and how we will measure the success of these. So we will be developing a full performance framework that we will be looking at around how this all gets monitored against whether we're making a difference to the population. And then from slide 187, I'll just talk a bit about the whole council approach and what we're proposing around this. So again, just reflecting that this is about everybody's efforts to improve health and reduce health inequalities and improve health equity, so that if we work in partnership across the council and wider, we can really make a bigger difference across all of this. So Professor Sir Michael Marmot has done a lot of work around thinking about across society, what are the things that make a difference to somebody's health outcomes and for health inequalities, and has done a lot of work around the social determinants of health and those key factors across somebody's life that can make a difference, that we as a whole system should be thinking about as core principles to make a difference. So they're around giving every child the best start in life, creating fair employment and good work for all, healthy standard of living, places and communities, strengthening ill health prevention, tackling racism and discrimination, and environmental sustainability. So thinking about that we're just trying to work through with all of those core principles and those actions that could really make a difference. What could we collectively do to improve even further the impact that we're all making? So what we're proposing is that we have a whole council commitment to health equity, and then just thinking about what that means in practice. So across the council, some kind of commitment to say that we will all be focusing on health inequalities through all that we're doing, and all directorates and work can have some impact on health inequalities. So thinking about, are there particular groups that would benefit more from focused actions or that are currently disadvantaged by things that we're doing? So how can we think about different groups and inequalities through all the work that we're doing? And are there different communities that there might be greater needs? So we need to focus more on those groups. Ensuring that actions underpinned by data, that we're increasing connections between different services, prioritising prevention, and thinking about how we can amplify each other's messages and improve health. And then what we've just done, and I will stop shortly and open to questions, is just think about the three pillars of how we can make this real across where public health reaches out and supports other directorates and other work across the council to have greater impact. So thinking about Healthy Place and how we can work with other colleagues around improving the health impact of the place in which people live and work. How we tackle the social determinants of health, so thinking about skills and employment and housing, and then how we ensure and work collaboratively to make sure that all of our people-focused services are really focused on prevention, prevention of ill health, prevention of further exacerbation of health and care needs, and just trying to make sure that that's evidence-based and linking together around prevention across all that happens through that work. And then we've given some outlines of some of the key ways in which we will work collaboratively across the council to support others in some of that work, which I won't go into in detail. But so open up to any questions, and then the next steps will be to finalise this plan, and then obviously it will be evolving as well and keep sort of adding to it and developing. So it doesn't mean that we can't then, you know, depending on need and priorities, flex even further as we go. We'll develop our monitoring progress and then start to implement, but again, recognising it's very much a partnership, whole system approach. Thank you.
Okay, Christine and then Steve.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really pleased. It's not so much a question, but a comment really. I'm really pleased to see that we are using the word equity instead of equality. It's so important to start using equity because makes such a difference. Equality means giving everybody the same, but everybody's needs are different. So therefore, giving needs to people on different levels is really important. So I'm really pleased to see that equity is used in this report, in this strategy.
Okay, thank you. No, I agree with that. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. I don't really have a question so much as a debate, if you like. Is it okay for me to do that now?
I should do that now.
Thank you. So a high-level document like a draft strategy for public health doesn't talk about individual policies. It's more about a direction. And I think with the direction, language really matters. And for that reason, I would like to challenge the use of the term reducing health inequality and also the term behavioural change, but to a lesser degree. I'd like to explain why. I think it's a great document. There's lots to support in it. I think probably 95% of the policies that will come out of it, I would absolutely support. So it's not the direction of travel I've got a problem with. It's the way that we're terming what we do. And the reason I have a problem with the term reducing health equality, well, there's a couple of reasons. But the first one is it's too woolly. Like, for instance, you could reduce health equality by making healthier people sicker. Now, that would bring the two groups together, but we don't want to do that. We're not aiming to do that. The other thing that worries me is that it suggests we care more about some people than others. Now, I understand that from a political point of view, reducing wealth inequality, for instance, some parties would take the view that that's applicable. But with public health, we're meant to look after everybody equally. And it worries me that this sort of language suggests that we're going to focus on a group of people rather than another group of people. Now, again, that would happen anyway. Even if we didn't use this language, public health is always going to affect people who are less healthy more. We don't need to say it because that's what it does. If you're already doing all the things that keep you healthy, you're not going to need many of our interventions. So by its own nature, public health always delivers equity. And I think I've got no problem with the use of the term equity. I agree that's better than equality. But I just worry about this language. Now, back when we first started doing a plan, back when Public Health joined County Council, we didn't allow this term. We took it out of all the documents, even though I know public health officials love to use it. We took it out of all of them and we used different language instead. I'm aware that probably a lot of people won't agree with me, but I would suggest it will be much better than saying, than reducing health inequality. We could say to improve the health outcomes for everybody. Now, that still allows us to help all the people that need help. It doesn't prevent any of our policies, but it's just better language. It shows that we are trying to help everybody because everybody can do with some help. Even the most healthy people sometimes make mistakes. And then the second thing is behavioural change. Now, I accept that you don't mean that to mean anything negative. You actually mean that you're going to help people to understand how they can be healthier. I'm fine with that. But I wish the term said that. I wish it said something like giving people information to empower them to be healthy. That would be better because otherwise it sounds a bit nanny state. And I'm personally not a big fan of bossing people around and telling them how to live. Giving them information to live better, fine. Telling them how to live, I think that should be down to their choice within the law. But even if you don't feel that way, surely you must accept that if you take that approach with people, it puts their back up and it makes them less likely to engage. People don't want to be told how to live. And so I just think our language could be better. Now, I know that this language is used all over the country and indeed over much of the world. That doesn't make it right. And I hope that what I've said at least gets people to think about the language a little bit to make it more inclusive of all the people. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got various other speakers, and I think I might invite you, Sally, to come back in a moment just to cover. So, Lucy, Adam, and then Anna.
Thank you. I'm just going to start by saying, while I accept Steve's right to say what he said about health inequalities and behaviour change, I think those are perfectly reasonable terms to use in this document. So I kind of take the points that he's making about what we want to do is increase everybody's health. But the inequalities are a massive issue in this county, and they're inequalities that are largely driven by wealth inequalities. Let's be fair about it. Let's be straight about it, that actually the people whose health suffers a great deal are people who are living in poverty mostly. And I think we need to be pretty upfront about talking about that. That wasn't what I put my hand up to talk about. But so there's lots of really brilliant stuff in this document. I think it's a really helpful sort of setting out the parameters of the things that we're trying to do. It's very nice and clear, actually. So thank you very much for that. My questions are largely about what happens next and implementation and how we do lots of these things and what the next steps in terms of how this changes the way in which our public health money is being used around the county. So it would be helpful to know what the kind of how this will feed into the use of our public health funding. The other thing that I really want to ask about is that middle pillar, which I've now lost, but we'll come back in a moment, on tackling the social determinants of health, which I think is so crucial to effective public health. But it's not something that this council can do. It's something that we have to do with lots of other partners. I mean, we can play our part in it, but you talked about housing, Sally, and employment and skills. Employment and skills are things that I spend quite a lot of time thinking about in my role at the Combined Authority, and the Combined Authority is doing a lot of work in that space at the moment. They've just been given a lovely large lump of money by central government, thank you, Richard, for the Youth Guarantee Scheme, which is all about trying to make sure that people who are potentially not coming into work when they're quite young are being supported to get jobs and think about what their career paths might be, or go into training and not becoming NEET, which is, for new councillors not familiar with all the acronyms, not in employment or training, I think. Does that, not in employment, education or training, that's got the 2 E's in it. And is there, I mean, people who are NEET at age 21 are at quite high risk of ending up in poverty throughout their lives. So it's a really important moment. So really my question is about how are we going to take this document forward, and how are we going to make sure we're working really effectively with our partners in the district councils and the Combined Authority, and slightly more specifically, have the Combined Authority people doing the Youth Guarantee work been talking to you, Sally? Thank you.
Okay, Adam and then Anna, and then Sally, are you happy to answer all those? Oh, Richard, and then Richard.
So thank you. So I take it this is a new public health strategy, and obviously really important, and congratulate you on it. And it looks like you'll be very busy, even in year 1. I was just going to ask a question really about strategic action 2. There's a bullet point saying a relevant housing measures to be agreed. Could you tell us a bit more about the background and the thinking about that, and why it is still to be agreed? And then on the debate item, I was just going to say on the term health inequalities, I'm not an expert in this area, but my understanding is that the inequalities themselves are a cause of ill health, and that might be something worth discussing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Anna, and then Richard.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much for the report, Sally. It's really accessible and clear. I just wanted to ask about the slide on, it's coming up as page 191, which is the whole council commitment to health equity, pillar 2, social determinants of health. And I just wanted to be sure that somewhere in there, and I think it's probably in this section, improve mental health to lower school absence, that we include we recognise that we are incorporating and bearing particular attention to our children in care, because you know, I'm asking this because I'm the chair of the corporate parenting subcommittee, and so I'm concerned about this. And I just want to make sure that, you know, we as corporate parents, we are all corporate parents, we should all be being mindful through all our work of the needs of our children in care. And I was trying to work out where it would best fit in with this. But somehow I would like to see some, I suspect in that section, work with education, personal social health, economic education service on childhood anxiety. You know, there's a recognition that these are children, these children in care are some of our children referred to here. But I just wondered if there's some way that we can recognise the fact that we as a county council have a responsibility to our children in care, and that sometimes the challenges that they have faced, which has caused them to come into our care, relate to and have an impact on their health, particularly. I wondered if we could cover that. And it
Okay.
may not be there. You may be aware of a better place to put it, but I would like that to be recorded.
Okay, thank you. And Richard.
Very briefly, firstly, I'm really pleased to see the commitment to the health in all policies policy and to the focus on social determinants of health. I think that's fantastic. And I congratulate Sally and her team on that. On health in all policies, it was an initiative of the past administration. And if I'm honest, we didn't do it as well as we wanted to. And so I hope and wish success if you can really push that through in the new mandate. And I sort of put this question to Val earlier, but I would like Sally to just comment on what's happening in the ICB. As I understand it, they've got massive financial further cuts, and that they're thinking of going into a Cambridgeshire, Hertfordshire, Bedfordshire ICB rather than a Cambridgeshire and Peterborough one. And that's bound to have huge implications. But if we're setting our health strategy here, how we partner with the health service is a really crucial part of that. And so I can't let this report sort of pass without asking what's the latest on that and how do we best respond as a county council in that frankly uncertain situation.
Okay, thank you. And the only other question I'd got relates back to something Lucy had said about working with other partners, but being clear what things we will deliver ourselves and what things we are going to influence others to do, and how all that is going to be measured, because there are certain things which we can do, but other things we can't directly. We can only do it with the help of other people. And it's not really clear from the way I read this that is absolutely clear. Anyway, there's lots of thought there, Sally. Do take it on block as you wish.
Thank you. Yes, lots of comments and lots of helpful, interesting things to come back on. Just hopefully I will do it all justice, and I'll try and take it from the top. So the first point around health inequalities, I think I can understand some of your points, but I think the point around health inequalities is health inequalities are avoidable and unfair differences in health outcomes or or access to healthcare or experiences of healthcare for different population groups, and they exist and they are unfair, and so we need to take action against those. Equity as a word is absolutely, Councillor is right around doing recognising that and doing more in some situations than others to make that equitable, rather than the difference in kind of using the word inequalities versus equitable is appropriate, but there are still differences in outcomes based on population need which are unfair, and the actions that we need to take to address that, I think, are really, really important for public health. So they're not necessarily a given within public health, because you do need to do more in some groups or in some geographical areas or for some issues to narrow that gap. So there's that kind of doing the same thing across the population, but doing more of it in certain groups or doing it a bit differently in certain groups to narrow that gap is really important. And actually, unfortunately, health inequalities are widening. The gap in life expectancy between the richest and poorest is widening nationally. So it's really important that we absolutely tackle that but I think there's probably a key point in there around making that a bit more explicit in some of the detail around what we include in the strategy. Behaviour change is a slightly challenging phrase. I absolutely agree, because it's not, and people used to say lifestyle changes as well, which isn't quite right either, because there's a real recognition that it's not just somebody's decision to smoke or be unhealthy. There's a whole kind of place where somebody lives and works that makes all of those decisions that they make around how they live their lives much easier to be unhealthy. And that's the whole environmental change that we need to be thinking about as well. Talking to the social determinants of health and the kind of surrounding environment impact that has on the way in which somebody lives. But sort of shorthand for all of that is we say behaviour change services. I think it's better than saying lifestyle services, because it's kind of recognising that actually we're trying to make it easier for somebody to live in a better way. So yeah, I take that point. And I think, again, we can kind of define that a bit more clearly as we go. Implementation around what happens next. So we've got, for the public health team, clarity on what we want to do for the next year. And I think the good thing about having this really clearly laid out strategic plan means that, just talking to that point around how we're going to use this to shape what we fund, I think this gives us now a really good structure to make funding decisions based on. So in the previous paper around finance, you saw what was laid out around the suggestions for public health reserves to be used for, and we used this as a framework for prioritising what we were taking forward as part of that. So it's already helping give some structure to some of those decisions, and we can use that going forward as well for working with partners as well and looking at other opportunities. We're definitely linked into the combined authority. So Val actually is the lead for the work and health work at the moment, thinking about various schemes that are connected around work and health. So the skills youth guarantee scheme is part of that, and there was a summit actually just a few weeks ago to try to bring all that together and think about what next around work and health. So there's some really positive work happening there. Housing measure to be agreed is mainly because if we're going to measure what difference are we making, it's quite difficult around housing and health to have a clear measure that gives some good indication around that. We could use fuel poverty, but it's not quite kind of really saying what's the difference around housing, what's the thing around housing that makes it different on health that we want to show we're making a difference on. So we're just trying to work that through. And children in care, absolutely. Going back to the health inequalities bit, I think they're a really key group that we know, if we're not really focused on, are at risk of health inequalities later in life and poorer outcomes. So through all of the work, when we're thinking about different groups that we might need to focus on more, that is a key group for us around making sure that we're giving equitable provision and outcomes later in life. So we can kind of pull that out and focus on that a little bit more. And then talking to the ICB points, yes, there are cuts coming through the NHS, and what that means, we just need to keep a really close eye on and making sure that through all of that work, the focus on prevention, on health inequalities, on outcomes doesn't get lost. And we're working very closely with ICB colleagues as they develop their plans. But I think whatever happens, the focus on what we need to do at place for our health needs and our population won't get lost. So I'm Director of Public Health for Cambridgeshire. If that footprint changes, I'll still be Director of Public Health for my geographical area and focusing on what the health needs are and what we need to do for the area to improve health outcomes. So that won't change. We just need to make sure that we're influencing in the right space for that. Hopefully that's answered everything.
That answered everybody's comments, questions. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. So what? Sorry. Oh, go on, David.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm just interested on the KPIs and the measure of success. Do you have all the baseline information there already about how many people, meet these criteria, so we can see the percentage reductions, so that the starting point, as it were?
Yes, we will do. We haven't brought all that together as yet. And some of those measures are already in the corporate performance that will come through at various points. But some is more detail that we want to make sure from the public health team that we're looking at. So there will be, we just haven't developed the framework in its entirety as yet.
Lewis.
Just a short comment. You mentioned the Sir Michael Marmot's 6 policy objectives, and I think it would be interesting if we read them whenever you have the chance. But the last one and the core principle probably answers some of Councillor Tierney queries, which is the last one is strengthen the role and impact of ill health prevention. And he says, prevention should be at the heart of health strategies. Invest in public health, lifestyle interventions, and health and early action. And the core principle that underpin all those 6 policy objectives is proportionate universalism, which means this principle states that interventions should be universal, but scaled in intensity according to the level of disadvantage, ensuring that those who need the most support receive it without excluding others. And I think that probably answers to some concerns.
Go on, Steve.
Sorry about this. I think I was reasonably clear when I said that I didn't disagree with most of the core principles. It was the language I felt was a problem, and that I think you will automatically help the people who need help the most, because that's the purpose of any sort of health. But you don't need to spell it out in such a blunt way, which I think is counterproductive. But we can agree to disagree.
Thank you. Sunny, what happens next to this? Because when we get to the recommendation, we're just being asked to note it or comment on it. How does it get approved, and should we be promoting it to full council in order that all the council-wide activities are committed?
So I don't think it needs to be formally approved anywhere else. We will just get moving with it, and recognizing we will incorporate some changes in it. It will be an evolving piece of work. What I am going to do is just think about how we communicate it and how we increase its visibility, and sort of shout about the commitment that we're all making as part of this. So I think there's a bit of work around a comms plan on it that I need to do, and I'm very happy for it to be talked about at full council. That would be great, so that people are aware of it, but I don't think it has to go there. So we will just keep going with it, and it will evolve as well. So as things come up, we can add to it as well.
Okay. Well, I think if the language is right, and then we will be happy to support it. And I'm looking towards Lucy here, whether it needs to go to full council to raise its profile with other committee chairs and people, or whether it goes to SRMP, or what happens to it next. Because at the moment nobody is formally approving it, and I would have thought it's something which probably needs to be approved by a committee or other.
I should think we could probably endorse it. I think that the key point about it is that it will go to the council senior leadership. Having been through here, it will go to the council senior leadership team to be implemented across all policies, as Richard rightly says it should be. But if it would be helpful for this committee to endorse it, I don't think it needs to come to full council. But I think if this committee would like to endorse it, I think that could probably be noted in the minutes rather than changing the recommendations, which is always difficult. But if we could ask Rashenda to note that we are endorsing it, and that we are not only noticing it, but fully supportive of it, and look forward to seeing kind of updates on the progress of it as we. I mean, what we should see is that this strategy then feeds into actual policies. So I suppose another thing that it would be useful to do would be, as future reports come forward, to have if they are linked to this strategy, to make sure that that's flagged up, so that we can see the relationship between the strategy and the actual work that's coming forward, because I think that would be helpful.
Before I bring Rashenda in, Patrick,
No, so I think because it isn't a policy, there's not a need to go to full council, but I think it'd be good if the committee endorse it. We can make sure that we update the senior leadership team in the council. They've already seen sight of this paper and commented on it. And I think the other point is really helpful point is that we reflect the actions against this as we bring future papers here, so committee can be assured that we are delivering against the plan that we've set down here.
I think in some ways it would also be helpful if it was flagged up in other, it's not just work that comes to this committee that this is relevant to. So if when there are things, I mean, I'm slightly hesitant about adding yet another paragraph to be in all of the council reports, but it will be, there's an awful lot of stuff that comes to the Highways and Transport Committee that this will be relevant to. It will be relevant to things that also come to the Skills Committee at the Combined Authority. How we can make that happen, I don't know, but it would be helpful if there were mechanisms whereby it could be linked across other committee papers so that we are able to track that. But I'll leave that to Patrick and Sally to work out how to do it.
I think that makes sense. So, Rishinda, we're not going to change the recommendation, but depending on what other people say, we might endorse the strategy. Steve, are you comfortable to endorse it as it stands at the moment, or would you abstain on that element based on your earlier comments?
Thank you, Chair. No, I'm quite happy to endorse it as long as we could keep considering the language going forwards. I hope that over time more people will see what I mean and we'll change it. Thank you.
No, that's fine. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. So we have endorsed the strategy, but separately, the recommendation that we're moving to is we've been asked to review and comment on the draft public health strategic plan for 2025-30, which we have done. Okay, thank you very much. The final item of business for this morning is, or now this afternoon, is item 11, the committee's agenda plan, training plan, and committee appointments. So, Rishinda, is there any changes to the committee agenda plan since publication?
No changes, Chair.
Any comments, questions on the agenda plan, Richard?
One comment, one question. The comment, which is aimed at the new members, really, the past committee was very keen to get a forward look at the commissioning process, not to wait till the last minute and just be told you've got to approve the contract or not. And again, I would only give us 5 out of 10 for how far we got on that. I'm not being personally critical of the officers on that, but it was the old culture of this council and it's been very, very difficult to break. I know the executive director thinks that this will be a better, more productive approach. And what it will enable is that us as members to influence things before the contracts are written, rather than just talk about it afterwards and in fact have very limited impact. So I do hope other members will also support that objective. And I hope in your agenda planning to see those forward reports about commissioning come to the full committee and not just to spokes. So that's my comment. My question is, as I recall, that we were going to have an insourcing paper at this committee and magically it's not there on the agenda today. So I'm not sure whether that was a political decision or an officer decision, but it certainly was on the agenda plan in the past. And will it be on the agenda plan in the future?
I think the agenda for this morning was intended to be light and non-controversial, and we were going to deal with everything fairly quickly. We've in fact taken much longer than I was anticipating. I need to just check with Patrick about when that paper is planned and what the current anticipation is, unless you want to comment now. No, okay, well, but we can speak outside and pick it up and spokes as well. And no other comments. We move to the training plan. So there have already been one item about the induction for members. If you weren't able to attend that, It is on the learning site, and I would encourage you to listen and watch. There's a subsequent item about commissioning, procurement, and contract management, and I gather that all councillors are going to be offered that because it's really important to all the committees that we work on. So that will be completed at some stage. Are there any comments on anything else? Is there anything that you think we should be including that is currently missing? No, so we'll see. Oh, go on, Patrick.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So just to remind committee that so there was an item which was due to be around scrutinising the NHS. That's still to be rescheduled. There's an importance of safeguarding adults and children, which is due to be presented myself and Martin Purbrick. That'll be an online session on the 10th of July. And as part of the committee's decision structures, sometimes, as you heard today, that there are often delegations of awarding contracts because the committee makes the decision to, in effect, spend the money and go out to tender. And when we award the contracts, we've recently done one with the chair and vice chair, and the question that came back was, you would potentially benefit as a committee to have some further conversations about the process, the commissioning process, the way that we contract manage, and that may include some aspects of procurement. There is a procurement, specific procurement training that's provided by our colleagues in the procurement team, and that's a broader session, but we are proposing that we will introduce a further training session or a development session, which is contained on my papers 205, which is around commissioning, procurement and contract management. So that's an additional one that we've added in following discussions with chair and vice chair. So if your committee is supportive of that, we will make plans to put something in place and get a date in diaries. Thank you.
Is that okay? Yep. So finally, we have committee appointments. We'll look first at appointments to outside bodies, which are set out in Appendix 3. I'll take each appointment in turn. If we have more than one nominee for any appointments, we'll move to a vote. I have got volunteers through Twisted Arms for all the outside bodies, which I'm happy to run through. But if anybody else has got any burning desire to be on anything, then we'll need to pick these up. And let me tell you what I've got at the moment. So the Cambridge Hospital projects, which I gather, Richard, were sort of run as a group last time. Councillors Navarro and Seif are happy to continue on both the Cambridge Cancer Research Hospital Engagement Board and the Cambridge Children's Hospital Liaison Group. The Cambridge University Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust of Governors, Councillor Navarro is happy to be the rep. For the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough NHF Foundation Trust, Councillor Kane is happy to be the rep. And previously, Claire Daunton was the rep on that, and prior to her, I was the rep. Claire has written some very useful words, which we will pass over to Claire. Tom Sanderson is the local member for Hinchinbrook, so covers the North West Anglia NHS Foundation Trust of Governors. Councillor Young is, we think, the local member for the Royal Papworth Hospital NHS Foundation Trust of Governors, but there's some difficulty, David, I gather, between whether she is the local member in her division or the local member as the city councillor. But anyway, she's happy to do it. So if you're content, we'll do that. And Richard, I need somebody to propose that Councillor Graham Wilson should be the appointee to the Adult Safeguarding Board, which you used to sit on.
It's something we've discussed outside the meeting. I'm delighted that you want to do that, and absolutely delighted to propose that.
Thank you very much. So if folk are content with all those nominations, we'll agree them. So next we're being asked to appoint a representative of each of our district council partners to the committee as non-voting members for health scrutiny business only for 2025-26. So if you recall, the health scrutiny is normally in the afternoon of the adults committee. We've just got to review whether that continues in that vein or whether it's dealt with differently. The nominations contained in the published papers are Councillor Mike Todd Jones for Cambridge City Council, Councillor Keith Horgan, and substitute Councillor Julia Huffer for East Cambridgeshire District Council, Councillor Corinne Garvey for South Cambridgeshire District Council. And since the publication, we've also received Huntingdonshire's District Council's nomination of Councillor Ben Pitt. So are the committee content to approve those appointments? Yep. Okay. Thank you very much. Finally, we're being asked to delegate authority to the Executive Director for Adults Health and Commissioning in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Adults and Health Committee to appoint to any remaining non-voting co-opted member and substitute member vacancies for health scrutiny business only. So I think in practice that's only substitute members because we've now had all the substantive members. This will allow the remaining nominees to be appointed as soon as possible. Are you content with that? Oh, Richard.
I am content with that, but do I see the health liaison groups here? And is it the intention of the administration to continue with those? And will there be appointments to those?
I think we're still having discussions about that, and it's one of the items that is going into Constitution and Ethics next week, the papers of which are being published within days.
Okay, but I would strongly advocate that those health liaison groups, which have been a crucial part of the council's scrutiny function over many years under the former Conservative Council, as well as that of the joint administration, continue. And there has been some different views amongst officers about this. So I appeal to the political leadership of the administration to show political will on that issue.
Thank you. And the leader was nodding when you said those things. So I think
I'll pick some of that up outside with you, Richard.
All right. Thank you very much. That concludes the business for today. We will meet next on Thursday, the 3rd of July. There were quite a few things which we were hoping to deal with today, but we'll be ready for definitely for the 3rd of July. So thank you for your time this morning. Okay, goodbye. Have a good journey home.